I still remember the exact shade of blue the sky was that morning. Impossibly bright, almost mocking in its cheerfulness as my world crumbled beneath my feet. My hands were shaking as I clutched my phone, reading the email for the 5th time, hoping somehow the words would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. The board has decided to move in a different direction. Thank you for your contributions. 2 weeks to transition your projects. 5 years at Lancaster Tech. 5 years of late nights, missed birthdays, canceled vacations. 5 years of Daniel telling me I was lucky to have him as my mentor, because without him I was nothing in this industry. And now, just like that, I was being pushed out. I set my phone down carefully on my kitchen counter, as if the gentle placement could somehow contain the scream building in my chest. Outside, the neighbors' kids were laughing, the sound filtering through my half-open window along with that cruelly perfect sunshine. I pressed my palms against the cool granite, focusing on the sensation to ground myself. Breathe in, breathe out. Don't fall apart. Not yet. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Heard the news. Let's talk. Drinks at Barlow's, 7 p.m.? Of course he knew before I did. He probably orchestrated it. Daniel Lancaster, tech wunderkind and my ex-boyfriend, now serving as CTO of the company his father had built from the ground up. The company where I'd poured my soul into developing what would become their most profitable product line. I should have known better. "You'll never make it in this industry without me, Mia," he'd said during our last fight, his voice dripping with the arrogant certainty that had once attracted me to him. "You're good, but not good enough. Not on your own." I'd left him the next day, but foolishly kept working at Lancaster Tech, convinced I could separate my professional and personal lives. I thought my work would speak for itself. I thought wrong. I texted back a simple, "See you there," then sank to my kitchen floor, finally allowing the tears to flow. I didn't cry because I was sad. I cried because I was furious, and the intensity of it frightened me. When the tears dried, something cold and clear crystallized in my chest. I wasn't going to just disappear. I wasn't going to prove Daniel right. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would show him exactly who Mia Chen could be without him. But first, I had to face him one more time. Barlow's was buzzing with the usual after-work crowd when I arrived. I'd spent the afternoon updating my resume, reaching out to contacts, and, most importantly, copying key documents from my work server. Nothing proprietary or illegal, just proof of my contributions, emails documenting my ideas before they became company initiatives. Insurance. I spotted Daniel immediately. He always did know how to command attention in a room. Tall, with the kind of effortless good looks that came from generations of privilege, he was nursing a whiskey at a corner table. When he saw me, his smile was sympathetic, but his eyes gleamed with something closer to satisfaction. "Mia," he stood as I approached, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I turned slightly, so his lips brushed air instead. His cologne, expensive, subtle, brought back unwanted memories. "I ordered you a gin and tonic? Still your favorite?" I sat down, ignoring the drink. "Why am I being let go, Daniel?" He sighed, settling back into his chair with the air of someone preparing to deliver unwelcome but necessary truths. I recognized the expression from our relationship. It was the same look he'd given me when explaining why my ideas needed refinement, or why I wasn't ready for a promotion. The company's restructuring the development team. We're moving toward a more integrated approach with the marketing division, and your position became redundant. He offered a regretful smile. "I fought for you, Mia. But in the end, business is business." The lie slid so smoothly from his lips that for a moment I almost believed him. That was Daniel's gift, making fiction sound like the only reasonable reality. "Redundant?" I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. The Phoenix Project was my brainchild. I built the framework, assembled the team. Our last quarterly report attributed 20% of company growth directly to Phoenix. Daniel took a measured sip of his whiskey. "Your contribution was valuable, no question, but the foundation was built on my initial concept, Mia. You refined it beautifully, but let's be honest, you were executing my vision." My fingers tightened around the untouched gin and tonic. Another lie. Phoenix had been born during a weekend hackathon I'd organized while Daniel was on a ski trip with his college buddies. By the time he returned, I'd already developed the prototype and presented it to his father. Daniel had claimed co-creator status within days. "I'm curious," I said, my voice dropping to ensure only he could hear me. Did you wait until the patent was finalized in the company's name before deciding I was expendable, or was that just fortunate timing? A flicker of something, annoyance? Concern? Crossed his face before the mask of sympathetic regret returned. You're upset, and that's understandable, but don't let emotion cloud the reality of business, Mia. It never suited you. What suits me then, Daniel? Since you seem to know me better than I know myself. He leaned forward, his voice softening to the intimate tone that had once made me feel like we were the only two people in any room. You're brilliant at execution. You take ideas and make them happen. But the visionary thinking, the leadership? He shrugged eloquently. That's not everyone's strength. There's no shame in that. I felt something crack inside me, the last remnant of whatever affection or respect I might have still harbored for this man. When did you decide I would be nothing without you? Was it before or after I refused to let you take credit for my work on the Lantern Protocol? He had the audacity to look wounded. I've only ever tried to help you, Mia. Even now. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across the table. I'm trying to soften the blow. A recommendation letter, plus some contacts at Vertex Systems. They're looking for a senior developer, not leadership track, but the compensation is fair. I stared at the envelope, not touching it. Vertex was Lancaster Tech's biggest competitor, but they were always 2 steps behind, always playing catch-up. Daniel wasn't offering me a lifeline. He was ensuring I'd remain in his shadow, visible but never threatening. How generous of you, I said, finally taking a sip of my drink to wash away the bitterness coating my tongue. I care about you, Mia. We have history. I don't want to see you struggle. No, I agreed, setting my glass down with deliberate care. You want to see me contained, manageable. That's what this has always been about, hasn't it? Control? His expression hardened slightly. You're being dramatic. This is business, not personal. I laughed then, a sound so hollow it seemed to echo between us. It became personal the moment you told your father I was emotionally unstable after I refused to get back together with you last quarter. Daniel's face registered genuine surprise before quickly recovering. I don't know what you think you heard. I didn't hear anything. I saw the email, Daniel. I was copying the board on the Phoenix quarterly assessment, and your message to your father was in the thread. The muscles in his jaw tightened. You're misinterpreting. You wrote, and I quote, Mia's become unstable since our breakup, erratic, possessive about her projects. Might be time to consider transitioning her out before she becomes a liability. I had memorized those words, read them so many times they were burned into my memory. You make sure I'm pushed out, then swoop in as the concerned ex offering a safety net. Classic Daniel. He didn't deny it this time, just studied me with calculating eyes. What do you want, Mia? Money? A different recommendation? Name it. And let's resolve this amicably. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. What I want isn't something you can give me, Daniel. Not yet. I reached for the envelope, tore it neatly in half, and dropped the pieces into his untouched water glass. But you'll know when I get it. His face darkened. Don't be stupid, Mia. The tech world is smaller than you think. You don't want me as an enemy. No, I agreed, shouldering my bag. You don't want me as an enemy, but here we are. I walked out of Barlow's with my back straight and my head high, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. Outside, the evening air was cool against my flushed skin. I gulped it greedily, feeling like I'd been underwater for years and was finally coming up for air. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, my closest friend at Lancaster Tech. How'd it go with the devil? I typed back, just declared war. You still have that contact at Invent Capital? Her response was immediate. Jacob Howard. Want me to connect you? I smiled, the first genuine one all day. Yes, it's time for Plan B. What Daniel didn't know, what no one at Lancaster Tech knew, was that I'd been preparing for this possibility for months. Ever since I found that email, I'd been quietly developing a business plan, one that would use everything I'd learned at Lancaster and take it to the next level. I just needed seed funding and the right team. As I walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Freedom. Daniel thought he was cutting me loose to sink. Instead, he'd just removed my anchor. The next 2 weeks at Lancaster Tech were an exercise in restraint. I smiled through patronizing farewells, accepted lukewarm wishes for future success, and methodically prepared for what came next. I documented everything, backed up emails proving my contributions, and scheduled strategic coffee meetings with colleagues who might soon be looking for new opportunities themselves. During my exit interview with HR, I was polite but firm. No, I didn't feel the company had treated me fairly. Yes, I believed gender had played a role in my dismissal. No, I wasn't planning legal action at this time. The HR representative, a nervous young man named Kevin, seemed relieved by my calm demeanor. Most people in your situation are more emotional, he said, shuffling papers into a folder. I smiled. I'm saving my emotions for more productive channels. On my last day, Daniel made a point of stopping by my desk as I was packing my few personal items. He leaned against the partition, arms crossed, the picture of casual concern. "I hear Vertex hasn't called yet," he said, voice low enough that nearby colleagues couldn't hear. I continued wrapping my desk plant in newspaper. I decided to go in a different direction. "Mia," his tone carried a warning, "don't be proud for pride's sake. The offer still stands." I looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "I appreciate your concern, Daniel, but I've got this figured out." Something in my confidence must have unsettled him because his expression shifted from condescension to wariness. "What are you planning?" "Nothing you need to worry about." I stood, box in arms. "At least not yet." He straightened, all pretense of friendliness evaporating. "Don't burn bridges you can't rebuild, Mia." "I'm not burning bridges," I assured him. "I'm building new ones. Goodbye, Daniel." As I walked toward the elevator, Lisa fell into step beside me. "Need help with that?" she asked, reaching for the box. "I've got it," I said. "But I could use company for a drink." Once we were safely ensconced in a booth at a cafe 3 blocks from Lancaster Tech, Lisa leaned forward. "Jacob Howard is very interested in meeting you. He said your preliminary proposal was, and I quote, 'the most exciting thing to cross his desk in months.'" I felt a flutter of nervous excitement. "Did he mention funding potential?" Lisa grinned. "He's thinking 7 figures if your full pitch delivers on the promise of the proposal." I exhaled slowly. That's more than I hoped for at this stage. You're offering something unique, Mia. A platform that can integrate with existing systems but exponentially improve efficiency? Every mid-size company struggling to compete with the giants will want this." She paused, stirring her coffee. "Lancaster Tech especially, once they realize what they've lost." "That's the idea," I admitted. "But this isn't just about revenge, Lisa. This is about creating something I believe in, something that's truly mine. Why can't it be both?" She raised an eyebrow. "The best revenge is success, after all." I allowed myself a small smile. "True, but success requires focus. I need to build a team, and fast." "Already working on that," Lisa said. "Remember Wei from back-end development and Tariq from UX design? Both expressed interest after I dropped some hints about your new venture. They're waiting for your call." I stared at her. "You've been recruiting for me?" She shrugged. "Let's just say I've been keeping an ear out for who might be dissatisfied with the current regime. Daniel's made plenty of enemies besides you. His management style doesn't inspire loyalty." That was putting it mildly. Daniel led through intimidation and manipulation, taking credit for successes and assigning blame for failures. But he was smart enough to show a different face to upper management, primarily his father and the board. "I meet with Jacob Howard tomorrow," I said. "If that goes well, things will move quickly." Lisa raised her mug in a toast. "To Phoenix rising from the ashes." I clinked my cup against hers. "Actually, I'm calling it Ascendant Solutions." That night, alone in my apartment, I spread my plans across my dining table. Wireframes, market analyses, development timelines, the result of months of late nights and weekends. What had started as a contingency plan had evolved into a comprehensive vision for a new kind of enterprise software platform. My phone pinged with an email notification. The sender's name made my stomach clench. Robert Lancaster, Daniel's father and CEO of Lancaster Tech. Subject, your departure. "Mia, Daniel informed me of your final conversation today." While I understand your disappointment regarding the company's restructuring decisions, I want to personally express my appreciation for your contributions to Lancaster Tech over the years. The technology sector can be volatile, and career paths often take unexpected turns. I've always seen potential in you, which is why I encouraged Daniel to mentor you when you first joined us as a junior developer. Should you reconsider Daniel's offer to connect you with Vertex Systems, please don't hesitate to reach out. My son has only your best interests at heart, as do I. Wishing you success in your future endeavors, Robert Lancaster, CEO, Lancaster Tech. I read the email twice, noting what wasn't said as much as what was. No acknowledgement of my direct contributions. No reference to Phoenix, which had boosted their stock price by 15%. Just vague appreciation and a reminder that I owed my career to Daniel's mentorship. I clicked reply, Mr. Lancaster, thank you for your email. My time at Lancaster Tech was indeed educational. As for Daniel's offer, I've decided to pursue opportunities better aligned with my professional goals. The tech world is full of possibilities for those willing to innovate. I suspect our paths will cross again, under different circumstances. Regards, Mia Chen. I hit send before I could second-guess the subtle hint in my closing line. Let them wonder. Let them underestimate me. It would make the eventual realization all the sweeter. I turned back to my plans, energized rather than drained by the exchange. There was something clarifying about having your worst suspicions confirmed. Robert viewed me as Daniel's protege, nothing more. In his eyes, I was a subordinate who had risen above her station, not a talented developer who had earned her position. That perception would change. I would make sure of it. Jacob Howard's office at Invent Capital occupied the 22nd floor of a gleaming downtown tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of the city, a visual reminder of the perspective Jacob brought to his investments, always looking at the big picture. Mia Chen, he said, rising from behind his desk as his assistant showed me in. A pleasure to finally meet in person. Jacob was younger than I expected for someone with his reputation, early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and keen eyes behind fashionable glasses. He had the relaxed confidence of someone who'd made enough successful bets to trust his instincts. Thank you for making time to see me, Mr. Howard. Jacob, please. He gestured to a seating area by the windows. And I should be thanking you. Your proposal was a breath of fresh air, ambitious but grounded, innovative but practical. He smiled. The kind of contradiction I find most promising in potential investments. Over the next hour, I walked him through my full vision for Ascendant Solutions, a platform that would integrate HR, project management, and customer relationship management with an AI engine that could identify inefficiencies and suggest optimizations in real time. It was similar enough to what I'd developed at Lancaster Tech to leverage my expertise, but different enough to avoid legal complications. The key distinction, I explained, is that Lancaster's Phoenix is designed for enterprise-level operations, companies with thousands of employees and established processes. Ascendant targets mid-size businesses that need enterprise-level capabilities but can't afford the infrastructure or personnel. Jacob nodded, making occasional notes. And you believe you can develop this within 12 months? The core functionality, yes, with the right team and funding. Speaking of teams, he set down his pen, who do you have lined up? Conditionally, I have commitments from a lead back-end developer, a UX designer, and a machine learning specialist, all currently employed elsewhere, waiting for funding confirmation before giving notice. At Lancaster Tech? He asked, one eyebrow raised. I met his gaze steadily. Some of them, yes. He leaned back, studying me. I make it a policy not to invest in vendettas, Mia. Emotion makes for poor business decisions. This isn't about emotion, I countered. It's about opportunity. Lancaster Tech has talented people who are undervalued and underutilized. I know their capabilities because I've worked with them. That's strategic recruitment, not revenge. And the fact that your platform would directly compete with Lancaster Tech's offerings to a market segment they've overlooked is business, not personal. I finished, echoing Daniel's words from Barlow's. Jacob's expression remained neutral, but I caught a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. Lisa mentioned there was history between you and the Lancaster heir apparent. I didn't flinch. Daniel Lancaster was my supervisor and, for a time, my partner. Neither relationship ended ideally, but Ascendant isn't about Daniel. It's about what I can build, what I can lead. And if I told you I had concerns about investing in a company whose founder has personal baggage with one of the industry's major players, I considered my response carefully. This was the moment that would decide everything. I'd say that every founder has baggage, Jacob. The difference is what they do with it. Some let it weigh them down, others use it as fuel. I leaned forward slightly. My history with Lancaster Tech gives me insight into their weaknesses, yes. But more importantly, it taught me what not to do as a leader. I watched a company prioritize legacy over innovation, hierarchy over talent. Ascendant will be different. Different how? He pressed. Transparent development cycles, profit sharing with the core team, credit where it's due. I held his gaze. I'm not interested in building a company on the Lancaster model. I want to create something that succeeds because it elevates everyone involved, not just those at the top. Jacob was silent for a long moment, then smiled slowly. Now that, Mia, is a vision worth investing in. He reached for a folder on the side table and slid it toward me. My standard term sheet for seed funding. 7 figures as discussed with Lisa, with potential for a second round based on developmental milestones. My heart raced as I opened the folder, scanning the numbers that would change my life. This is very generous. It's proportionate to the risk and potential reward, Jacob corrected. I'm not being charitable, Mia. I believe Ascendant can become a major player, especially with the mid-market focus you've identified. He paused. But I should warn you, once Lancaster realizes what you're building, they'll come at you hard. Legally, professionally, perhaps personally. I closed the folder, a calm certainty settling over me. I'm counting on it. The next 3 months passed in a blur of activity. With Jacob's funding secured, I leased office space in a renovated industrial building across town from Lancaster Tech's gleaming headquarters. It was smaller, less prestigious, but it had character. Exposed brick walls, huge windows, open spaces that encouraged collaboration rather than hierarchy. Wei and Tarek were the first to join, giving notice at Lancaster Tech the day after our funding was announced in a modest press release. They brought with them exactly what I'd hoped for, deep institutional knowledge without the institutional constraints. Daniel went ballistic when I resigned, Wei told me on his first day at Ascendant, setting up his workstation. Demanded to know if I was joining you, offered a 15% raise if I stayed. What did you tell him? I asked, helping him unpack his collection of programming books. Wei grinned. That my decision wasn't about money. You should have seen his face, like the concept of loyalty to a person rather than a paycheck was incomprehensible. By the end of the first month, our team had grown to 8 former Lancaster employees, plus 6 new hires with fresh perspectives. The office hummed with the energy of a group united by purpose rather than mere employment. Lisa remained at Lancaster Tech, a decision we'd made together. I'll be more valuable to you there, she'd explained. Eyes and ears on the inside. I'd protested initially, concerned about putting her in a difficult position, but she'd been adamant. Daniel doesn't suspect me. To him, I'm just your work friend who was smart enough to stay where the security is. Let me do this. Her intelligence proved invaluable. Through Lisa, I learned that Lancaster Tech was aware of Ascendant but dismissive, another startup that would likely flame out before becoming a real threat. Daniel apparently had convinced his father that I lacked the leadership capabilities to build anything substantial. He called you a code monkey with delusions of grandeur, Lisa reported during one of our weekly coffee meetings, well away from either company's offices. I laughed, the insult stinging less than it might have months ago. Perfect. Let them underestimate us while we build. And build we did. 14-hour days, working weekends, the team collaborating with an intensity born of shared purpose. We were creating something new, yes, but also proving something to ourselves as much as to Lancaster Tech. By month 3, we had a functioning prototype of the Ascendant platform. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't complete, but it worked. The core engine, the part that would analyze workflows and suggest optimizations, performed even better than my initial projections. We need to start thinking about beta testers, Tarek said during our development meeting. Real-world applications, not just our simulations. I've got a list of potentials, I said, pulling up a spreadsheet on the conference room screen. Mid-size companies in various sectors who've expressed interest. Wei studied the list, then pointed to a name halfway down. Maricorp? Aren't they a Lancaster Tech client? Currently, yes, I confirmed. But their contract is up for renewal next quarter, and my contact there says they're unhappy with Phoenix. Too cumbersome for their scale, too expensive for their budget. If we landed Maricorp as our first major client, Tariq began, his eyes widening as the implications sank in. It would send a message, I finished. That Ascendant isn't just another startup, but a legitimate alternative to Lancaster Tech for the mid-market segment. The team exchanged excited glances. This wasn't just business anymore, it was becoming a mission. Later that evening, as I was reviewing our development timeline alone in my office, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost sent it to voicemail. Another recruitment agency probably, but answered at the last moment. Mia Chen speaking. Ms. Chen. The voice was unfamiliar, female, brisk. This is Sarah Winters, CTO at Maricorp. I understand you're developing an alternative to Lancaster Tech's Phoenix platform. I sat up straighter, pulse quickening. That's correct, Ms. Winters. Ascendant Solutions is building an integrated management platform specifically designed for mid-size operations like Maricorp. I'd like to see it. Tomorrow, if possible. I scrambled to adjust my mental timeline. We weren't ready for a full demonstration yet. The UI was still rough, certain modules incomplete. But Maricorp represented exactly the kind of client we needed. We're still in late-stage development, I said cautiously. But I'd be happy to walk you through what we have so far. Would 2 p.m. work for you? I'll be there, she paused. And Ms. Chen, I should mention that Daniel Lancaster personally called me this morning, offering a significant discount on our Phoenix renewal. He seemed quite eager to keep our business. My grip tightened on the phone. Did he mention Ascendant specifically? No, she said, but he referenced unproven startups with inexperienced leadership that might approach us. It seemed targeted. So Daniel was aware of us after all, and concerned enough to start protectively reaching out to clients. Interesting. What did you tell him? I asked. That Maricorp makes decisions based on solutions, not relationships. I'll see you tomorrow, Ms. Chen. After she hung up, I sat motionless, absorbing this new development. Daniel had broken his pattern. Instead of dismissing me, he was actively working to block Ascendant's progress. It was a small victory, a sign that he was taking us seriously. But it also meant the real battle was just beginning. I called an emergency team meeting, and we worked through the night preparing for Sarah Winters' visit. By morning, we had a presentation that focused on our strengths while honestly acknowledging the areas still in development. No false promises, no exaggerated capabilities, just the genuine potential of what Ascendant could offer Maricorp specifically. Sarah arrived precisely at 2 p.m., accompanied by 2 technical staff. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-30s with a no-nonsense demeanor that commanded respect without demanding it. Impressive space, she commented, glancing around our open-concept office. Very different from Lancaster's corporate labyrinth. We believe environment shapes process, I replied, leading them to our conference room. Ascendant is built on collaboration, not hierarchy. For the next 2 hours, we demonstrated our platform, openly discussing both its current capabilities and our development roadmap. Rather than hiding our works in progress, we invited Sarah and her team to ask questions, offer suggestions, even point out potential issues. Your transparency is refreshing, Sarah said as we concluded. Lancaster treats their development like state secrets. We want partners, not just customers, I explained. Clients who help shape the product to meet their actual needs, not what we think they need. Sarah studied me thoughtfully. Daniel Lancaster called again this morning, offered an additional 15% discount and free integration support for a 2-year commitment. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. That's generous. It's desperate, she corrected. And it made me wonder what he's so afraid of. She glanced at her technical staff, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We'd like to be your first beta client, Ms. Chen. Full access to the Ascendant platform as it develops, in exchange for comprehensive feedback and a case study if the implementation succeeds. I felt a surge of triumph but maintained my professional composure. We'd be honored to partner with Maricorp, Ms. Winters, but I should ask, why take a chance on us when Lancaster Tech is offering such incentives to stay? Sarah's smile was slight but genuine. Because you're building what we actually need, not trying to force us into a system designed for companies 5 times our size. And, she added, I recognize genuine innovation when I see it. This platform has potential beyond what you're even marketing. We shook hands and I walked them out, my mind already racing with next steps. As they waited for the elevator, Sarah turned back to me. "Just so you know, I worked at Lancaster Tech early in my career. Daniel was 2 levels above me then." Her expression hardened slightly. "He has a pattern of claiming credit for women's work. It's well known in certain circles." The elevator arrived before I could respond. As the doors closed, I stood motionless in the reception area, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Validation certainly, but also a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just my experience, it was a pattern. One I was now positioned to break. When I returned to the team, their expectant faces told me they'd been watching the exchange through the glass conference room walls. "Well?" Wei asked. I allowed myself a genuine smile. "Meet our first beta client. We start integration next week." The cheer that erupted felt like the beginning of something bigger than I'd initially imagined. This wasn't just about proving Daniel wrong anymore. It was about creating a company that stood for everything Lancaster Tech didn't: fairness, collaboration, recognition of merit regardless of gender or background. That night, I worked late again, refining our implementation plan for Maricorp. Around midnight, my phone pinged with a text from a number I still hadn't deleted, despite my better judgment. "Daniel, heard you're talking to Maricorp. Ambitious, but they'll come back to us when your system crashes under real-world load. Some advice? Stay in your lane, Mia. Development, not leadership." I stared at the message, feeling a cold clarity settle over me. Even now, he couldn't help but underestimate me, condescend to me. I started typing a response, then deleted it. Instead, I took a screenshot of the message and saved it to a folder on my phone labeled Motivation. No response was the best response. Let my actions speak for themselves. The Maricorp implementation exceeded even my optimistic projections. Within 6 weeks, their operational efficiency improved by 22%. Their customer response time decreased by 30%. And most importantly, their staff reported higher satisfaction with the Ascendant platform than they ever had with Phoenix. Sarah Winters became our most vocal advocate, speaking about Ascendant at industry conferences and introducing me to other potential clients. By our 6th month of operations, we had 12 beta clients and a waiting list of 20 more. Jacob Howard was impressed enough to expedite our second round of funding, allowing us to double our development team and move to larger offices. The press started to take notice. Tech Insider ran a profile titled "Ascendant Solutions, the David to Lancaster's Goliath." Business Weekly included me in their 30 under 30 list of entrepreneurs to watch. It was during this period of rapid growth that Lisa delivered the news I'd been waiting for. "Lancaster Tech is officially concerned," she reported during our weekly coffee meeting. "There was an emergency executive committee meeting yesterday. Daniel presented a comparison between Phoenix and Ascendant, which means he's been studying your platform closely." "What was his assessment?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my heart raced. Lisa's smile was triumphant. "That you've identified a market segment they've neglected, and that Ascendant poses a non-trivial threat to Lancaster's mid-market strategy." "Non-trivial," I repeated, savoring the words. Coming from Daniel, that was practically an admission of fear. "There's more," Lisa continued. "Robert Lancaster asked specifically about you, whether your departure had been a mistake. Daniel tried to downplay your role in Ascendant's success, claiming you must have significant technical support making the decisions." I laughed at the transparency of his deflection. Of course he did. Heaven forbid he admit a woman he deemed nothing without him could build a successful company. Robert seemed skeptical of Daniel's assessment, Lisa added. "He's sharper than his son gives him credit for." This was a development I hadn't anticipated, creating friction between Daniel and his father. It wasn't my goal, but I couldn't deny a certain satisfaction at the thought. "What's their plan?" I asked. Two-pronged approach. First, they're fast-tracking a streamlined version of Phoenix aimed at the mid-market, basically trying to copy what you're doing. Second, they're planning to approach your existing clients with aggressive offers to switch back. I nodded, having expected something along these lines. "Time to accelerate our plans, then." "What did you have in mind?" Lisa asked. "It's time to move from defense to offense," I said, pulling out my tablet and showing her a document I'd been preparing for weeks. "We're going to target Lancaster Tech's enterprise clients who are unhappy with Phoenix but stuck due to scale requirements." Lisa studied the document, her eyes widening. "You've been developing an enterprise version all along?" "Not developing, planning," I corrected. The architecture is scalable by design. We always intended to move upmarket eventually. We're just moving up the timeline. This will put you in direct competition with Lancaster Tech's core business, Lisa warned. They won't just be concerned, they'll be threatened. Good, I said simply. It's time Daniel learned what it feels like to be the one scrambling to catch up. The next day, I called a company-wide meeting to announce our accelerated timeline for Ascendant Enterprise. The team, now 30 people strong, responded with typical enthusiasm, despite the increased workload it would entail. This isn't just about business competition, I told them frankly. Lancaster Tech will come at us hard when we enter their territory. Legal challenges, poaching attempts, potentially even sabotage of client relationships. I need everyone prepared for that reality. Wei, now our Chief Technology Officer, spoke up. Most of us came from Lancaster because we believe in what you're building here, Mia. We knew what we were signing up for. Tariq nodded in agreement. Lancaster's been the unchallenged giant for too long. They've gotten comfortable, complacent. It's about time someone showed them there's a different way to build technology and treat people. Their support moved me more than I wanted to admit. What had started as my personal redemption story had evolved into a collective mission. These people weren't just following me, they were committed to the vision of what Ascendant could become. Then let's get to work, I said, and show them exactly what we're capable of. 2 weeks later, Lisa's predictions about Lancaster Tech's response came true in dramatic fashion. 3 of our beta clients received personal visits from Daniel Lancaster himself, offering customized packages to return to Phoenix at a fraction of their previous cost. 2 declined. 1, a financial services firm called Westridge Capital, accepted the offer and withdrew from our beta program. It wasn't about the technology, their CIO explained apologetically in his termination email. Westridge has banking relationships with Lancaster Financial Group. The pressure came from above my pay grade. It was our first significant setback, and I felt it keenly. That evening, after most of the team had gone home, I remained in my office, analyzing what we could have done differently. My phone rang, Lisa calling outside our usual schedule. "Are you alone?" she asked without preamble. "Yes," I replied, immediately alert. "What's happened?" "Daniel is making his move," she said, her voice low and urgent. "He convinced the board to establish a competitive response team with a significant budget, but that's just the public face. Privately, he's hired a firm to investigate you and Ascendant for any legal vulnerabilities." My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of vulnerabilities? Intellectual property infringement, primarily. He's convinced you must have used proprietary Lancaster Tech code or concepts in building Ascendant. He's looking for proof. A cold anger settled in my chest. He won't find any because there isn't any. I was meticulous about building from scratch. "I know that," Lisa said, "but he's desperate. The board is questioning his handling of mid-market strategy in light of Ascendant's success. He needs to discredit you, Mia." I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. "Anything else I should know?" Lisa hesitated. "It's probably nothing, but he's been asking questions about your personal life, dating history since him, close friends, financial situation before Ascendant. It feels invasive." A shiver ran down my spine. Daniel had always been controlling during our relationship, needing to know where I was, who I was with. It seemed that tendency hadn't diminished. "Thank you for the warning," I said. "Be careful, Lisa. If he's digging this deep, he might start questioning loyalties within Lancaster." "I've thought of that," she replied. "I've been vocal about thinking your departure was a mistake, but Lancaster Tech still being the better option career-wise. Playing both sides makes me less suspicious." After we hung up, I sat in the darkening office, considering my options. We hadn't done anything illegal or unethical in building Ascendant. Our technology was legitimately novel, developed without reference to Lancaster Tech's proprietary systems. But legal merit and legal victory weren't always the same thing, especially when facing an opponent with vastly greater resources. I needed to prepare for the worst while continuing to push forward, and I needed to protect my team from becoming collateral damage in what was, at its core, a battle between Daniel and me. The next morning, I met with our legal counsel, a sharp-minded woman named Vivian Park who specialized in tech industry intellectual property. "Lisa's intelligence is concerning but not surprising," Vivian said after I briefed her. "Companies like Lancaster Tech often use legal intimidation to hamper emerging competitors." "What's our exposure?" I asked bluntly. Minimal, based on what you've shared about your development process. You were smart to build from the ground up and to thoroughly document that process. She tapped her pen against her legal pad. But understand that the goal of a legal challenge wouldn't necessarily be to win, it would be to drain your resources and distract your leadership. So we need to be prepared but not paranoid, I summarized. Exactly. I'll prepare defensive documentation and have it ready if needed. In the meantime, maintain your focus on execution. Execution meant pushing forward with Ascendant Enterprise, our ambitious expansion into Lancaster Tech's core market. The development team was working around the clock to scale our system for larger implementations, while our newly formed sales team, led by a former Lancaster Tech executive who'd approached us after reading about Ascendant, began making discreet inquiries to potential enterprise clients. One name on our prospect list held particular significance: Telonix Corporation, a global communications company and one of Lancaster Tech's flagship clients. Their Phoenix implementation had been Lancaster's largest to date, a fact that Daniel had emphasized in every press release and earnings call for the past 2 years. Telonix was also, according to industry rumors, increasingly dissatisfied with Phoenix's performance at scale. Their system was plagued by integration issues and performance bottlenecks that Lancaster's team had struggled to resolve. Targeting Telonix is high risk, high reward, our sales director Marcus cautioned during our strategy meeting. If we fail to deliver, it could damage our credibility with all enterprise prospects. And if we succeed? I asked, already knowing the answer. Marcus smiled slowly. If we succeed, it changes everything. Lancaster Tech loses their most prestigious reference client, and Ascendant instantly becomes a credible enterprise player. The decision wasn't difficult. Make the approach, I directed. But be subtle. The last thing we need is Lancaster getting wind of this before we've had a chance to demonstrate our capabilities. Marcus nodded, already mentally planning his strategy. Their CIO, Elena Diaz, is speaking at the Tech Forward conference next week. I can arrange a coincidental meeting. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. Coffee? Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Vesta Cafe, followed by the initials ED, Elena Diaz, moving even faster than we'd anticipated. I arrived at Vesta Cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table that offered privacy while allowing me to watch the door. At precisely 10 a.m., a woman entered, tall with an air of contained energy, her sharp gaze sweeping the room before settling on me. Ms. Chen, she said, sliding into the seat across from me without waiting for confirmation of my identity. Thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice. The pleasure is mine, Ms. Diaz, I replied, studying her carefully. Though I admit I'm curious how you got my personal number. A slight smile crossed her face. The tech world runs on information, Ms. Chen, and information about Ascendant is highly tradable currency at the moment. I nodded, accepting this non-answer. I understand Marcus from my team was planning to connect with you at Tech Forward next week. I prefer to conduct preliminary conversations directly, she said, waving away a server who approached our table, particularly when they involve potentially sensitive business decisions, such as a global corporation considering alternatives to their flagship enterprise system, I suggested. Elena's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened with interest. You're direct. Good. Let me be equally direct. Telonix's Phoenix implementation is failing to meet our expectations. The system is over-engineered for actual use cases, inflexible when business needs change, and, most critically, unable to scale as promised. I listened carefully, noting not just her words but the frustration evident in her tone. Lancaster Tech is aware of our concerns, she continued. They've promised fixes, optimizations, dedicated support. What they haven't done is acknowledge the fundamental misalignment between Phoenix's architecture and our requirements. And you're wondering if Ascendant represents a viable alternative. I finished for her. I'm wondering if Ascendant Enterprise, which doesn't officially exist yet, according to your public materials, could be developed with Telonix's specific challenges in mind. She leaned forward slightly. I've studied what you've built for the mid-market, Ms. Chen. The architecture is elegant, adaptable. If it can truly scale as your documentation suggests, it could be exactly what we need. My pulse quickened. This was moving faster than I dared hope. Ascendant Enterprise is further along than our public materials indicate, I admitted. We've been methodical about our market approach, preferring to under-promise and over-deliver. A refreshing philosophy in this industry. Elena commented dryly. We would need to understand Telonix's specific requirements in detail, I continued, and be realistic about implementation timelines. But yes, I believe we could develop Ascendant Enterprise to address the exact challenges you're facing with Phoenix. Elena studied me for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. I'm prepared to share our requirements, documentation, and current system architecture under appropriate confidentiality agreements. In return, I want a detailed technical assessment of how Ascendant would approach our use cases differently than Phoenix. That seems fair, I agreed. But I should ask, Lancaster Tech will consider this a significant betrayal. Are you prepared for that response? For the first time, Elena smiled fully. Daniel Lancaster has been promising solutions to our problems for 18 months. He's had his chance. Besides, she added, business isn't personal. It's about results. I couldn't help but appreciate the irony of hearing Daniel's own words used to justify potentially his biggest professional loss. Then we have an understanding, I said. I'll have our legal team prepare the confidentiality agreements today. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Elena paused. One more thing, Ms. Chen. Daniel Lancaster speaks about you occasionally, dismissively as if you're a minor irritant rather than a serious competitor. Her eyes met mine directly. Is there history there I should be aware of? I considered deflecting but opted for selective honesty. We worked together at Lancaster Tech. The professional relationship ended poorly. I suspected as much. She nodded thoughtfully. For what it's worth, he underestimates you. That's an advantage I suggest you continue to leverage. With that, she was gone, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with the distinct feeling that the game had just changed significantly. Back at the office, I called an emergency meeting with the leadership team. Wei, Tariq, Marcus, and our newly hired operations director, Priya, gathered in the conference room as I outlined the opportunity with Telonix. This is happening months ahead of our projected timeline, Priya pointed out, concern evident in her voice. Do we have the resources to deliver? It will require reprioritization, I acknowledged. Some of our mid-market development might need to slow temporarily while we focus on the enterprise architecture. Wei leaned forward, already thinking through the technical challenges. We've designed the core system to be scalable from the beginning. The biggest hurdles will be integration with their existing data architecture and implementing the higher security protocols required at their scale. Both solvable problems, Tariq added. The real question is whether we can do it fast enough to meet their expectations while maintaining quality. I looked around at the team, recognizing the mix of excitement and apprehension on their faces. This is a defining moment for Ascendant, I said quietly. If we do this right, we establish ourselves as a legitimate enterprise player a year ahead of schedule. We also send a very clear message to Lancaster Tech. That the student has become the master? Marcus suggested with a slight smile. I shook my head. That there was never a master-student relationship to begin with, just a talented developer who was held back by someone who feared her potential. The team nodded, understanding the personal stakes behind the professional opportunity. Let's get to work, I said. Wei, I want a technical assessment team assembled by end of day. Tariq, you'll lead the UI/UX considerations for enterprise scale. Priya, start planning resource allocation and timeline projections. Marcus, make sure those confidentiality agreements are ironclad. As they filed out, energized by the challenge ahead, I remained at the conference table, allowing myself a moment to absorb the magnitude of what was happening. Landing Telonix as a client would be a massive victory for Ascendant as a company. But it would also be a personal vindication that even I hadn't dared to imagine so soon. Daniel had told me I'd be nothing without him. Now I was on the verge of taking his most valuable client. The irony wasn't lost on me, but neither was the responsibility. This wasn't just about proving Daniel wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. About showing that my vision for technology, for leadership, for building a company based on merit rather than connections or gender, was viable, was better. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Lisa. Daniel knows, she said without preamble. Someone at Telonix leaked that Elena met with you. He's livid. I closed my eyes briefly, processing this development. How bad? Bad enough that he threw his laptop across his office, Lisa replied. He's called an emergency meeting with his father and the head of Lancaster's legal department for tomorrow morning. Any insight on their likely approach? Not yet, but I'll try to find out. She paused. Be careful, Mia. When Daniel feels threatened, he lashes out, and he's never felt more threatened than he does right now. After hanging up, I sat motionless, contemplating my next move. The logical approach would be to accelerate our work with Telonix, try to finalize an agreement before Lancaster could mount an effective counteroffensive. But rushing might lead to mistakes, vulnerabilities that Daniel could exploit. No, the better strategy was to proceed methodically, confidently. To let Daniel react emotionally while we responded strategically. His rage was a weakness I could use, just as he had once used my trust against me. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Elena Diaz, outlining next steps and setting expectations for our technical assessment. Professional, thorough, confident. Everything Lancaster Tech often failed to be in their client communications. As I worked, a text message appeared on my phone. Daniel again. Telonix? Really, Mia? You're playing in waters too deep for you. When this blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you. I screenshot the message and added it to my motivation folder, now containing a dozen similar communications. Then I returned to my email, more determined than ever to get this right. Daniel thought he was warning me. What he didn't realize was that he was simply confirming I was on the right path. The next month was the most intense of my professional life. Our team worked around the clock to develop a detailed technical proposal for Telonix, while simultaneously defending against Lancaster Tech's increasingly aggressive countermeasures. As Lisa had predicted, their first move was legal. A formal letter arrived alleging that Ascendant's technology bore substantial similarities to proprietary Lancaster Tech systems and demanding we cease development until an independent audit could be conducted. Vivian, our legal counsel, responded with a comprehensive document demonstrating the independent development of our platform, including time-stamped repositories and witnesses to our design process. She also pointedly noted that any audit would necessarily involve both companies' systems, potentially exposing Lancaster Tech's architecture to the same scrutiny they were demanding of ours. The legal threat receded quickly after that, replaced by more subtle tactics. Rumors began circulating among potential clients about Ascendant's financial stability. Anonymous reviews appeared online questioning our platform's security. A technology blog published a thinly sourced story suggesting our rapid growth was fueled by unethical business practices. Each attack required a measured response, drawing resources and attention away from our core mission. It was exactly the strategy Vivian had warned about, not to defeat us directly, but to distract and deplete us. Through it all, I maintained regular contact with Elena Diaz, providing transparent updates on our progress and honest assessments of challenges. Her responses were consistently encouraging. Telonix was proceeding with their due diligence, and our proposal was being received favorably by technical evaluators. On a personal level, the pressure was taking its toll. I was sleeping 4 hours a night, subsisting on coffee and protein bars, pouring every ounce of energy into ensuring Ascendant not only survived Lancaster's attacks, but thrived despite them. My apartment became little more than a place to shower and change clothes. The office was home now. It was during this period, when I was working late one night, that the security system alerted me to an unauthorized access attempt. Someone had tried to use an old Lancaster Tech badge to enter our building. The security camera footage showed a figure in a hoodie at the main entrance, face carefully angled away from surveillance. After the badge failed, they'd left quickly, disappearing into the darkness beyond the building's exterior lights. I reported the incident to the police, who took the information but offered little hope of identifying the individual. Unless they actually broke in, this is just a failed attempt, the officer explained. We can increase patrols in the area if you're concerned. I was concerned, but not for the reasons the officer assumed. The timing, late at night when most of the team was gone, suggested the intruder knew our patterns, and the use of a Lancaster Tech badge was either incredibly sloppy or deliberately provocative. The next day, I had our security team sweep the office for surveillance devices and implement additional access restrictions. Better safe than sorry, especially with the Telonix proposal in its final stages. That evening, Lisa called with news. The board meeting today was intense, she reported. Robert Lancaster questioned Daniel directly about losing market share to Ascendant, asked him how a startup with limited resources was outmaneuvering Lancaster Tech in multiple market segments. How did Daniel respond? I asked, unable to suppress a flicker of satisfaction at the image. Deflection, mostly. claimed our growth was unsustainable, that we were underpricing to buy market share and would collapse when funding ran out. She paused. But then Robert asked specifically about Telonix, whether the rumors of their dissatisfaction were accurate. And Daniel admitted there were isolated issues, but insisted the relationship was solid. Robert didn't seem convinced. He's requested a detailed client satisfaction report by the end of the week. This was valuable intelligence. If Daniel was being pressured to explain Telonix's potential departure, he might make desperate moves to prevent it, or to ensure that if he couldn't keep them, neither could we. "Lisa," I said carefully, "did you hear anything about someone trying to access our building using a Lancaster badge?" Her sharp intake of breath was answer enough. "No, but there was something strange yesterday. Daniel was asking about our physical security protocols, whether badges were still functional after an employee left. Said he was concerned about vulnerabilities in the system." A chill ran down my spine. "You think he was planning to break in himself?" "I don't know," she admitted. "It seems extreme, even for him, but he's becoming increasingly erratic as the pressure mounts. His position in the company isn't as secure as it once was." After hanging up, I considered my options. Confronting Daniel directly would be satisfying but ultimately counterproductive. Reporting suspicions to the police would yield little without concrete evidence. The most effective response was to continue executing our strategy while remaining vigilant. The next week, Elena Diaz requested a final presentation of our proposal to Telonix's executive committee. This was the moment we'd been working toward, our opportunity to demonstrate not just that Ascendant Enterprise could match Phoenix's capabilities, but that our approach was fundamentally superior for Telonix's needs. The presentation was scheduled for their headquarters, an imposing glass tower in the financial district. As I prepared, selecting my team and refining our materials, a text arrived from an unknown number. "Parking level B2, northwest corner, 30 minutes before your Telonix presentation. Come alone. Information you need to know before you walk into that room." I stared at the cryptic message, weighing possibilities. It could be a legitimate insider with valuable intelligence. It could also be a trap, an attempt to prevent me from making the presentation at all. After careful consideration, I decided on a compromise. I would go, but not alone and not without precautions. I asked Marcus to accompany me, instructing him to wait in the car while I made the initial contact, ready to alert security if necessary. I also set my phone to record audio continuously and shared my location with Wei and Tariq. We arrived at Telonix headquarters 40 minutes early, proceeding to the designated parking level. The vast concrete expanse was half filled with cars, the northwest corner dimly lit and partially obscured by support columns. "I don't like this," Marcus muttered as we circled the area. "Too isolated, too many blind spots." "That's why you're staying in the car," I reminded him, checking that my phone was recording properly. "Any sign of trouble? Call security immediately." I stepped out into the cool, oil-scented air of the parking garage, my sensible heels clicking against concrete as I walked toward the northwest corner. My heart was racing, but I kept my pace measured, my expression neutral. Whatever awaited me, I wouldn't show fear. As I approached the designated area, a figure emerged from behind a column, a woman in a tailored suit, her face instantly recognizable despite our having never met in person. "Rebecca Lancaster," I said, stopping a cautious distance away. "This is unexpected." Daniel's younger sister nodded, her expression tense. Unlike her brother, who had inherited their father's commanding presence and golden boy confidence, Rebecca had always operated in the shadows of Lancaster Tech, brilliant but overlooked, dedicated but undervalued. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Chen," she said, her voice lower and more hesitant than I'd imagined. "I apologize for the dramatic meeting arrangement, but I couldn't risk being seen with you." "Why are you here?" I asked directly, still wary of a trap. Rebecca glanced nervously toward the elevators before responding. "Because my brother is planning to sabotage your presentation today." I maintained a carefully neutral expression, though my pulse quickened. "How?" "He's obtained a copy of your preliminary proposal to Telonix, don't ask me how, and prepared a counter-argument that specifically targets vulnerabilities in your approach. He's meeting with Elena Diaz right now, presenting evidence that your system can't scale as promised. This was valuable information but also puzzling. Why are you telling me this? Daniel is your brother. Lancaster Tech is your family's company." Something hardened in Rebecca's expression. Lancaster Tech was supposed to be a meritocracy. That's what our father built. But under Daniel's influence, it's become... She hesitated, searching for words. Let's just say I recognize the pattern of behavior. What he did to you, he's done to others, including me. I studied her, seeing the sincerity beneath her nervous demeanor. What exactly are you suggesting I do with this information? Adapt your presentation, address the scalability concerns directly before they're raised, and... She reached into her bag, withdrawing a flash drive. This contains internal benchmark data from Phoenix's implementation at Telonix, real performance metrics, not the sanitized versions in official reports, data that proves the system is failing at scale exactly as you've suggested. I made no move to take the drive. That's proprietary Lancaster Tech information. Possessing it could be legally problematic for Ascendant. It's Telonix data about their own systems, Rebecca corrected. Lancaster doesn't own it, they merely have access to it. And as Telonix's potential new vendor, you have every right to understand the current system's actual performance. She had a point, though the legal nuances were complex. Why risk your position at Lancaster to help me? Rebecca's smile was sad. Because Daniel needs to learn that his actions have consequences. Because I've watched him take credit for others' work, including mine, for too long. And because Lancaster Tech needs to change if it's going to survive. She extended the flash drive again. Sometimes a shock to the system is the only way forward. After a moment's hesitation, I accepted the drive. Thank you for the warning. She nodded once, already turning to leave. Good luck with your presentation, Ms. Chen. I suspect we'll be seeing more of each other in the future. As she walked away, disappearing between parked cars, I stood motionless, processing this unexpected development. Daniel's own sister, working against him from within Lancaster Tech. It was a complication I hadn't anticipated but could definitely use. I returned to the car, where Marcus waited anxiously. Rebecca Lancaster, I explained before he could ask, warning us that Daniel has seen our proposal and is preparing counterarguments. His eyes widened. Can we trust her? I think so, I said, studying the flash drive in my palm. But we'll verify the information before using it. Let's head upstairs. We have a presentation to modify. In the 30 minutes before our scheduled meeting, Wei, attending virtually, Marcus and I quickly analyzed the data Rebecca had provided. It was authentic as far as we could tell. Detailed performance logs showing Phoenix struggling under Telonix's workload, with response times degrading and error rates increasing as transaction volumes grew. We adjusted our presentation accordingly, adding a section specifically addressing scalability concerns and demonstrating how Ascendant's architecture would avoid Phoenix's bottlenecks. When we entered the Telonix conference room, I immediately spotted Daniel sitting beside Elena Diaz, his expression shifting from smug confidence to poorly concealed surprise at my calm demeanor. Ms. Chen, Elena greeted me, professional but warm. Thank you for coming. As you can see, we've invited Lancaster Tech to join us today to ensure we're making a fully informed decision. Of course, I smiled, meeting Daniel's gaze directly. Healthy competition benefits everyone, especially the client. Daniel's returning smile didn't reach his eyes. Mia, ambitious presentation you've prepared. I look forward to providing some context to your claims. The meeting proceeded with our presentation first. I led confidently through our proposal, emphasizing not just Ascendant's capabilities, but our understanding of Telonix's specific challenges that Phoenix had failed to address adequately. When I reached the newly added section on scalability, I noted Daniel shifting uncomfortably in his seat. A concern that often arises with new platforms is their ability to handle enterprise-level workloads. I acknowledged directly. Let me address that proactively by showing you our architecture's performance under simulated conditions, matching Telonix's actual transaction volumes. I displayed graphs comparing our projected performance with Phoenix's actual performance, using anonymized data that paralleled what Rebecca had provided, without directly revealing we had access to their internal metrics. Daniel interrupted, his voice tight. Those comparisons are based on theoretical models, not real-world implementation. Phoenix has a proven track record with enterprise clients. A fair point, I conceded, which is why we've based our projections on actual performance patterns observed in large-scale implementations similar to Telonix's environment. I turned to Elena. We believe in transparency, Ms. Diaz. If Phoenix is meeting your performance expectations, our comparisons will be irrelevant. But if you're experiencing response degradation at peak loads, error rate increases during high-volume transactions, or integration failures with legacy systems, then our architecture offers significant advantages. Elena's gaze sharpened as I described exactly the issues Telonix was experiencing. Daniel's face flushed slightly. "You seem remarkably well informed about Telonix's internal systems, Ms. Chen," he said, accusation evident in his tone. "We're thorough in our analysis," I replied calmly. "It's called due diligence, Daniel, something all professional organizations should practice before making claims about performance." The subtle jab landed as intended. Daniel's jaw tightened visibly as he recognized I was prepared for his counter-arguments before he'd made them. The remainder of the presentation proceeded smoothly, with Daniel attempting several times to undermine our proposal, but finding his points already addressed in our materials. By the meeting's conclusion, the energy in the room had shifted perceptibly in Ascendant's favor. "Thank you both for your presentations," Elena said as we prepared to leave. "Telonix will make its decision within the week." In the elevator lobby, away from the Telonix executives, Daniel cornered me while Marcus was distracted by a phone call. "How did you know?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "About the performance issues? About my meeting with Elena this morning?" I met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps I'm just better at this than you think, Daniel, or perhaps you're not as clever as you believe yourself to be." His eyes narrowed. "You had inside information. That's the only explanation." "Like you had inside information about our proposal?" I countered. "Let's not pretend either of us is playing by gentlemanly rules here." "This isn't over," he warned, stepping closer. "Even if you get Telonix, which you won't, Lancaster Tech can crush Ascendant a dozen different ways." "You've been trying to crush me for months," I reminded him. "How's that working out so far?" Before he could respond, Marcus returned, eyebrows rising at the obvious tension between us. "Everything okay here?" "Perfect," I said, not breaking eye contact with Daniel. "Mr. Lancaster was just wishing us luck with the Telonix contract." Daniel's smile was cold. "Actually, I was reminding Ms. Chen that success often comes before a fall." "How philosophical," I commented. "We have to go now, but it's been illuminating, as always." In the car heading back to Ascendant's offices, Marcus finally asked the question I could see had been bothering him. Was Rebecca's information legitimate, or was it a plant to trap us into using proprietary data? I considered his question carefully. The information checked out, and our presentation stayed within ethical boundaries. But you're right to be cautious. Lancaster family dynamics are complicated. "You think she has her own agenda?" "Everyone has an agenda," I replied. "The question is whether hers aligns with ours for now." I stared out the window at the passing cityscape. Let's just say I'm grateful for the warning, but not naive enough to fully trust its source. 3 days later, Elena Diaz called with the news we'd been hoping for. Telonix had selected Ascendant to replace Phoenix as their enterprise management platform, pending final contract negotiations. The implementation would be phased, starting with non-critical systems and expanding as we proved our capabilities. It was a monumental victory for Ascendant, validation of our technology, our approach, and our vision. The team celebrated with champagne and heartfelt toasts, the months of relentless work finally culminating in tangible success. But as the celebration continued around me, I found myself drawn to the quiet of my office, contemplating not just what we'd accomplished, but what lay ahead. Landing Telonix was a beginning, not an end. Daniel would respond, possibly with even more desperate tactics. Lancaster Tech still had vastly greater resources and market presence, and I still had something to prove, not just to Daniel, not just to the industry, but to myself, that I could build something lasting, something meaningful, something better than what I'd left behind. My phone pinged with a text message from Lisa. "The Lancaster board just called an emergency session for tomorrow morning. Word is Daniel's leadership is officially being questioned. Congratulations, Mia. You did it." I smiled faintly at the screen, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and thoughtfulness. Yes, I had proven Daniel wrong about me, but there was still so much more to accomplish. This wasn't just about a personal vendetta anymore. It was about creating a company that embodied the values I believed in: merit over connections, collaboration over hierarchy, recognition over appropriation. Ascendant was becoming exactly what its name promised, a rising force, challenging not just Lancaster Tech, but the entire industry's entrenched ways of doing business. As I looked through the glass walls of my office at my team, brilliant, dedicated people who had taken a chance on my vision, I felt a surge of responsibility toward them. They deserved a leader focused on the future, not the past. Daniel had said I'd be nothing without him. I had proven him spectacularly wrong. Now it was time to show the world what we could be. Not just his replacement. Something entirely new. Something better. Outside my office, Wei raised his glass in a silent toast. I smiled and raised an imaginary glass in return, my resolve strengthening. The real work was just beginning. 3 months after landing the Telonix contract, Ascendant Solutions moved into our third office space, a sleek, modern building with our name emblazoned across the top in illuminated letters visible from the highway. At night, the sign glowed with a soft blue radiance, a beacon announcing our arrival as a major player in the tech landscape. "Quite the statement," Jacob Howard remarked during the office warming party, champagne flute in hand as he gazed out the floor-to-ceiling windows of our executive floor. "From startup to market disruptor in under a year, I'd say my investment is performing better than expected." I smiled, following his gaze to the city skyline where Lancaster Tech's headquarters still dominated. "For now. We're just getting started, Jacob. The Telonix implementation is proceeding ahead of schedule, and we've secured 5 more enterprise clients since then. And Lancaster Tech has lost, 15% of market share?" He raised an eyebrow. "Their stock took quite the hit after the quarterly report." 17%, I corrected, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from my voice. "And yes, their stock is down 22% year-to-date." Jacob studied me over the rim of his glass. "You track their numbers closely." "Know your enemy," I shrugged. "Besides, their decline is directly correlated to our growth. It's just good business to monitor the metrics. And nothing to do with your personal history with the Lancaster heir?" I met his gaze evenly. "That history informs my understanding of their weaknesses, but it doesn't drive our strategy. Ascendant succeeds because we build better solutions and treat our people well, not because I have a score to settle with Daniel Lancaster." Jacob nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "Speaking of the Lancaster heir, I hear there have been some developments in their executive suite. Robert Lancaster has taken a more active role in day-to-day operations," I confirmed. "Daniel remains CTO, but his authority has been curtailed." What I didn't mention was how this information had come to me, through Rebecca Lancaster, who had become an unexpected ally. After her parking garage warning before the Telonix presentation, she had reached out again, this time through more conventional channels. We'd met twice for coffee, ostensibly to discuss potential collaboration between our companies, but really to exchange information about Lancaster Tech's internal struggles and Ascendant's rising trajectory. "My father has essentially put Daniel on probation," she'd revealed during our last meeting. "He has 6 months to turn around the enterprise division's performance, or he'll be reassigned to special projects, corporate speak for being sidelined." The news had given me a complicated sense of satisfaction. Daniel was facing consequences for his actions, not for how he'd treated me personally, but for the business failures that had resulted from his leadership style. It felt like the beginning of justice, though not yet its completion. A chime from my phone interrupted my thoughts. A text from Wei. "Potential security issue. My office ASAP." I excused myself from Jacob and made my way through the celebrating crowd to Wei's office on the development floor. He was hunched over his computer, brow furrowed in concentration. "What's happening?" I asked, closing the door behind me. "We're seeing unusual access patterns in the client portal," he explained, gesturing to his screen where a monitoring dashboard displayed a series of alerts. "Someone's making repeated attempts to access the Telonix implementation documentation using varied credentials." I leaned closer, studying the data. "Brute force attack? More sophisticated than that. The attempts are spaced to avoid triggering standard security protocols, and they're coming from multiple IP addresses." He looked up at me grimly. "Someone who knows our system architecture is trying to get into our most sensitive client data." A cold prickle ran down my spine. "Lancaster Tech? Can't confirm, but the pattern matches what we might expect if someone with insider knowledge of our security protocols was directing the effort." I straightened, mind racing through implications and responses. Activate the honeypot protocol. Let them think they're succeeding, but route them to the sandboxed environment with the redacted documents. Wei nodded, fingers already flying across his keyboard. Already on it, and I've alerted the full security team. They're ending their party participation now. Good. Keep me posted on any developments. I paused at the door. And Wei? Let's keep this between the senior team for now. No need to alarm everyone during the celebration. As I returned to the party, maintaining a composed expression while anxiety churned beneath, I spotted Lisa across the room. She had officially joined Ascendant 2 months ago after Daniel discovered her connection to me and orchestrated her dismissal from Lancaster Tech on trumped-up charges of corporate espionage. His attempt to punish her had backfired spectacularly. Free from Lancaster Tech, Lisa had brought her considerable talents as a systems architect to Ascendant, along with detailed knowledge of Phoenix's vulnerabilities and Lancaster's client relationships. She now headed our client success division, ensuring seamless transitions for companies moving from Lancaster's systems to ours. She caught my eye and must have read something in my expression because she immediately disengaged from her conversation and made her way to me. Problem? She asked quietly when she reached my side. Potential security breach attempt, I murmured. Wei's handling it, but I'm concerned about the timing. Coinciding with our office warming and the Telonix implementation milestone? Not subtle. She frowned. Daniel's fingerprints? It has his impatience, but not his sophistication. He knows better than to leave such an obvious trail, unless he wants us to know it's him. Lisa's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. A distraction, perhaps? Or intimidation? The thought had occurred to me as well. Daniel wasn't just technically brilliant, he was strategically cunning when properly motivated. If he was behind this attack, there was likely more to it than a simple attempt to access client data. Double the security team monitoring all systems tonight, I decided, and have someone physically check the server rooms and network infrastructure. If this is a distraction, I want to know what it's distracting us from. Lisa nodded and slipped away to implement these measures while I returned to my role as host, smiling and conversing while my mind worked furiously on the potential threat. By midnight, the party had wound down, with only a few die-hard celebrants remaining. I excused myself to check on the security situation, finding Wei and the team still monitoring the system from our newly established Security Operations Center. Status? I asked, accepting the coffee Wei handed me. The breach attempt stopped about an hour ago, he reported. They accessed the honeypot environment, downloaded several files, and disconnected. We're analyzing their movements now to understand what they were specifically targeting. And the physical security checks? All clear, Lisa confirmed, joining us with her own steaming mug. Nothing unusual found in any of the secure areas. I frowned, the tension in my shoulders refusing to ease. It feels incomplete, too obvious, too performative. Like someone wanted us to know we were being probed, Wei agreed. Or wanted to distract us from something else entirely, Lisa added. The three of us stood in contemplative silence, staring at the monitoring screens as if they might suddenly reveal the true purpose behind the evening's events. Keep the enhanced monitoring in place through the weekend, I finally decided. And let's accelerate the security audit we had scheduled for next month. I want a complete vulnerability assessment by the end of next week. As I drove home in the early hours of the morning, the city streets deserted and my mind still churning with possibilities, my phone rang. Unknown number. At 3 a.m. that was rarely good news. Mia Chen, I answered cautiously. Ms. Chen, Rebecca Lancaster. Her voice was tight, controlled, but with an underlying urgency that immediately put me on alert. I apologize for the hour, but this couldn't wait until morning. What's happened? I asked, pulling into an empty parking lot to give the call my full attention. Daniel is planning something significant. A pause, the sound of a door closing. I overheard him on the phone earlier tonight. He was talking about using leverage and mentioned Telonix specifically. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. What kind of leverage? I'm not certain, but he said something about undisclosed technical debt and how it would change the board's perspective when Ascendant fails to deliver. Another pause. Whatever he's planning, he believes it will not only damage your Telonix implementation, but restore his standing with the board. A chill settled over me that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. Technical debt, the accumulated cost of choosing expedient solutions over optimal ones, was inevitable in software development. But significant, undisclosed technical debt could derail an implementation entirely if discovered too late. "Thank you for the warning," I said, mind already racing through possibilities and countermeasures. "May I ask why you continue to help Ascendant against your family's company's interests?" Rebecca's laugh was soft, tinged with something like resignation. "I told you before, Lancaster Tech needs to change if it's going to survive. Daniel's leadership style is driving away our best talent and alienating clients." A brief hesitation. "And perhaps I believe you'll build something better than what Lancaster has become. Something closer to what my father originally intended." After we disconnected, I sat in my car for several long minutes, staring at nothing while processing this new information. Daniel was planning to sabotage our Telonix implementation by exposing some form of technical debt. But what? We'd been meticulous in our development practices, prioritizing clean, sustainable code over quick fixes. Unless... The thought hit me with such force that I immediately called Wei despite the hour. "The Phoenix integration layers," I said the moment he answered. "How thoroughly have we audited the compatibility modules for Telonix's legacy systems?" His response was slow, heavy with dawning comprehension. "We've validated functionality, but we've been working against Phoenix's API documentation, not its actual codebase." A pause. "If there are undocumented behaviors or dependencies, they could cause cascade failures when we fully transition from Phoenix," I finished. "And if Daniel knows about these undocumented elements, he could be waiting for us to fail before revealing the solution." Wei's voice hardened. "Using Telonix as a battleground. With their operations as collateral damage," I added, disgust evident in my tone. "Assemble the integration team at 8 a.m. We need to perform a deep audit of every interface between our system and Phoenix's remnants. And contact Elena Diaz first thing. We need to be transparent about the potential issue and our response." "On it." "And Mia?" "If this is what Daniel's planning, it's not just unethical. It could violate his fiduciary responsibility to Telonix as their current vendor." "Document everything," I instructed. "Every analysis, every communication, every mitigation step. If Daniel is willing to risk a client's operations to target us, we need to be prepared to expose that choice for exactly what it is." The next week passed in a blur of intense activity. Our integration team worked around the clock to identify potential compatibility issues between Ascendant and the legacy Phoenix components still active in Telonix's ecosystem. Elena Diaz, informed of our concerns, provided unprecedented access to their systems and internal documentation. "I appreciate your transparency," she told me during a video conference 3 days into the audit, "especially given that this vulnerability could have been exploited to your detriment." "We consider ourselves partners in Telonix's success," I replied, "not just vendors. Your operational integrity comes before competitive advantage." Her expression was evaluative, measuring. Lancaster never approached system transitions with that philosophy. "Interesting that you use the term exploited, implies you believe this technical debt was left intentionally." I chose my words carefully. "Let's just say I find it unusual that specific integration points lack standard documentation, yet function through seemingly arbitrary workarounds. It suggests deliberate obscurity rather than poor development practices." Elena nodded slowly. "The board would be very interested in that assessment, especially if proven correct." She leaned forward slightly. "Keep me updated on your findings, Ms. Chen." All of them. By the end of the week, we had identified and documented 17 distinct compatibility issues in the Phoenix to Ascendant transition path. Most were minor, easily addressed through additional code layers. But 3 represented significant risks, undocumented dependencies that could cause catastrophic data inconsistencies if not properly managed during the transition. "The pattern is clear," Wei explained during our briefing session. "These aren't random oversights, they're deliberate trapdoors, functional in normal operation but designed to fail under specific transition scenarios." Tariq nodded in agreement. "And they're sophisticated enough that they would appear to be failures in our system, not issues with the Phoenix components. If they triggered during full implementation, it would look like Ascendant couldn't handle enterprise-scale operations." The implication hung heavily in the air. Daniel had built failure points into Phoenix's integration layer, intending them as insurance against competitors. "Against me. Can we mitigate them?" I asked, focusing on the practical rather than the personal betrayal this represented. Already developing solutions, Wei confirmed. Now that we know what to look for, we can build appropriate safeguards. It will delay full implementation by about 3 weeks, but eliminate the risk. And we've documented everything? I pressed. The original code, the hidden dependencies, our mitigation approaches? Lisa nodded. Comprehensive documentation with validator signatures from 3 independent engineers. If we need to prove intentional design flaws, we have the evidence. I sat back, considering our options. We could quietly address the issues and proceed with the implementation, avoiding public confrontation. Or we could expose Daniel's tactics, potentially triggering a major scandal in the industry. The vengeful part of me, the part still angry at Daniel's betrayal and subsequent attempts to destroy my career, wanted to release the evidence immediately. To watch him face the consequences of his actions in the most public, damaging way possible. But the CEO in me, the leader responsible for Ascendant's reputation and future, recognized that such a move carried significant risks. It would position us as participants in industry drama rather than focused solution providers. It might make potential clients nervous about transitioning to our platform, fearing they would be caught in similar conflicts. We proceed with the mitigation plan, I decided. Inform Telonix fully, but we don't publicize the findings unless absolutely necessary. You're letting him get away with it? Lisa asked, surprise evident in her tone. I'm choosing the battlefield, I corrected. Daniel set this trap expecting either our failure or our outrage. Either response serves his interests. We're taking a third option, succeeding despite his sabotage, then using our knowledge strategically rather than reactively. Wei nodded slowly, understanding dawning. We document everything, build our case carefully, then hold it in reserve until the moment it will do maximum damage to him personally rather than creating industry chaos. Exactly. I met each of their gazes in turn. Lancaster Tech is more than Daniel. It employs thousands of people, many of them talented developers who had nothing to do with his decisions. We target him, not the company as a whole. Cold, Tariq commented with a hint of admiration. Calculating. Strategic, I corrected with a small smile. Just as he taught me to be. The next day, I met with Elena Diaz to present our findings and mitigation plan. Her reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for, professional outrage tempered by appreciation for our handling of the situation. This is disturbing, she said, reviewing the documentation on the tablet before her. Deliberate technical sabotage disguised as proprietary architecture. We've developed comprehensive solutions, I assured her. The implementation timeline extends by 3 weeks, but security and functionality are enhanced rather than compromised. She set down the tablet, studying me intently. You're not planning to take this public. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Not at this time. Our priority is ensuring Telonix's successful transition to Ascendant. Very diplomatic. Her eyes narrowed slightly. And very different from how most would respond to such a discovery. I met her gaze steadily. Retaliation provides momentary satisfaction, but rarely serves long-term interests. Ascendant is focused on building, not destroying. She tapped one finger thoughtfully against the table. I'm authorized to inform you that Telonix is pleased with Ascendant's performance and transparency to date. So pleased, in fact, that our board has approved accelerating the full transition from Phoenix once these issues are resolved. A pause, deliberate and meaningful. We've also begun recommending Ascendant to our industry partners. The significance wasn't lost on me. Telonix was one of the most respected corporations in their sector. Their recommendation carried immense weight with similar enterprises, the very clients Lancaster Tech depended on for their core business. We appreciate the vote of confidence, I said simply, and we'll ensure it's justified by the results we deliver. As I left the Telonix building, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Daniel had tried again to destroy what I was building, and again had failed. But this time felt different. Not just another skirmish won, but a fundamental shift in the balance of power between us. He was resorting to increasingly desperate tactics, risking his professional reputation and his company's relationships for a chance to see me fail. Meanwhile, Ascendant continued to grow stronger, build better, reach higher. I had already won. I just wasn't sure Daniel knew it yet. 2 months later, the technology world was buzzing with news of Ascendant's meteoric rise. The successful Telonix implementation, completed ahead of even our revised schedule thanks to the team's relentless dedication, had opened doors throughout the enterprise market. Major clients were approaching us rather than the other way around, drawn by Telonix's glowing testimonials and our growing reputation for integrity as well as innovation. Lancaster Tech, meanwhile, was facing what financial analysts had begun describing as an existential crisis. Their stock had fallen another 15%. 3 senior executives had resigned. Industry publications ran articles questioning whether the company had lost its innovative edge. And Daniel, according to Lisa's sources within Lancaster, was increasingly isolated within the company he had once seemed destined to lead. Robert Lancaster had pulled him from client-facing roles entirely, limiting his authority to internal technical decisions only. It should have felt like victory, like the completion of the revenge I'd set out to achieve. Daniel was suffering professionally, just as he had once made me suffer. His arrogance was being punctured, his reputation diminished, his future prospects narrowing. Yet as I stood at the window of my corner office, watching the sunset paint the city in hues of orange and gold, I felt strangely hollow. The satisfaction I'd anticipated was muted, incomplete. Something was missing from this revenge narrative I'd been constructing in my head. A knock at my door interrupted these thoughts. Tariq, tablet in hand and excitement evident in his expression. "You need to see this," he said, handing me the device. Just published in the business section of the Chronicle. The headline jumped out immediately. Lancaster Tech considers restructuring amid market pressure. Sources suggest potential acquisition targets. I skimmed the article quickly, key phrases leaping out. Board exploring strategic options. May seek partnership with established tech giants. Possible acquisition by competitors. Robert Lancaster reportedly open to stepping aside for right opportunity. I looked up at Tariq, processing the implications. They're actually considering selling? He nodded, barely containing his excitement. Industry rumors suggest at least 3 major tech conglomerates have expressed interest in acquiring Lancaster Tech for its patent portfolio and client base, even as those clients continue migrating to us. But Lancaster has always been fiercely independent, I murmured, rereading portions of the article. Robert built that company from nothing. It's his legacy. Legacies change, Tariq shrugged. And sometimes protecting the legacy means letting go of control. He studied me curiously. This could be the ultimate victory, you know. If Lancaster Tech is absorbed by a larger entity, Daniel would almost certainly be pushed out entirely. He was right, of course. If Lancaster Tech was acquired, Daniel would likely lose what remained of his position and influence. Few acquiring companies retained redundant executives, particularly those associated with failed strategies. Yet the prospect brought me less pleasure than I might have expected months ago. Perhaps because it would be a victory I hadn't directly achieved, Daniel undone by corporate machinations rather than by my specific actions. Or perhaps because something in me had shifted during Ascendant's growth, my focus increasingly on building rather than avenging. Let's see how it plays out, I said noncommittally. Corporate acquisitions rumors are often just that, rumors. But this particular rumor gained substantial traction over the following weeks. Financial analysts began speculating openly about Lancaster Tech's valuation in a potential acquisition. Technology publications ran profiles of likely suitors, analyzing strategic fits and potential synergies. The company's stock stabilized somewhat on the acquisition speculation, though still far below its previous heights. Through Rebecca Lancaster, I learned that the rumors held substantial truth. The board had indeed authorized Robert to explore partnership or acquisition options, driven by concern that Lancaster Tech was losing ground too rapidly to recover independently. "My father is devastated," she confided during one of our increasingly regular meetings. "Lancaster Tech has been his life's work. The idea of surrendering control to a tech conglomerate is anathema to him." "Then why consider it?" I asked, genuinely curious. She sighed, turning her coffee cup in slow circles. "Because he's 72 years old and facing reality. Daniel was supposed to be his successor, but that plan has complications now. Me being one of them," I acknowledged. Rebecca's smile was tinged with sadness. "The largest one, arguably, but not the only one. Daniel's leadership weaknesses would have emerged eventually, with or without Ascendant's competition. You just accelerated the process." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And perhaps that's for the best. For everyone, including Lancaster Tech itself." Our conversation stayed with me, prompting reflections I hadn't anticipated when I'd embarked on this journey of professional revenge. I had wanted to prove Daniel wrong, to show him I could succeed without him, to make him regret underestimating me. I hadn't set out to contribute to the potential downfall of an entire company, a company that, despite its flaws and Daniel's influence, had also been responsible for significant innovations and provided livelihoods for thousands. These thoughts were still swirling in my mind the following evening when my private line rang, a number only available to my closest associates and family members. "Mia Chen," I answered, expecting Wei or Lisa with an update on our latest project. "Ms. Chen, Robert Lancaster." I froze, momentarily speechless. Robert Lancaster calling me personally? The implications sent my mind racing in a dozen directions simultaneously. "Mr. Lancaster," I recovered quickly. "This is unexpected." I imagine so. His voice, deeper than Daniel's, rougher around the edges from years of cigars, carried the weight of authority earned rather than inherited. "I believe it's time you and I had a conversation. In person." My pulse quickened. "May I ask what about?" "The future," he replied simply. "Yours, mine, Lancaster Tech's. They seem to be increasingly interconnected." I hesitated, wariness warring with curiosity. "With respect, Mr. Lancaster, our companies are competitors. Any conversation between us would need to respect appropriate boundaries." "Of course." A pause, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "This isn't about collusion, Ms. Chen. It's about exploration of possibilities neither of us might have considered previously." My curiosity won out. "When and where?" "Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. My home, not the office. I'll text you the address." Another pause. "And Ms. Chen, I'd appreciate if this meeting remained between us for now. No associates, no assistants, just two principals having a frank discussion." After I agreed and ended the call, I sat motionless at my desk, mind whirling with possibilities. What could Robert Lancaster possibly want to discuss that required such privacy? An acquisition offer for Ascendant? A ceasefire of sorts between our companies? Or something more personal related to his son? I considered calling Jacob for advice but decided against it. This was a situation I needed to navigate on my own, without external influences shaping my perceptions or responses. The next evening, I drove myself to the address Robert had provided, an elegant modernist home in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, all clean lines and walls of glass overlooking a dramatically lit garden. A housekeeper admitted me, leading me through the minimalist interior to a back terrace where Robert Lancaster waited. He rose as I approached. Tall, silver-haired, with the rangy build of someone who had remained physically active despite his years. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct and evaluative. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Chen." He gestured to a chair opposite his at the small table set with a bottle of scotch and 2 glasses. "Can I offer you a drink?" "Thank you," I accepted, watching as he poured with the precision of someone who considered such details important. He handed me the glass, then raised his own slightly. "To unexpected conversations," I echoed the toast, taking a small sip of what was clearly an exceptional scotch. "I admit I'm curious about why you wanted to meet Mr. Lancaster." "Robert, please." He settled back in his chair, studying me with unnerving intensity. "And I wanted to meet because I believe in understanding worthy adversaries directly, not through second-hand reports or media narratives." "Is that what I am? A worthy adversary?" His smile was slight but seemed genuine. "You've built Ascendant from concept to market disruptor in approximately 18 months. You've captured 17% of our market share and counting. You've implemented your platform at Telonix, one of our flagship clients, more effectively than we managed in twice the time." He took another sip of scotch. "Yes, Ms. Chen. You've earned the designation of worthy adversary." I nodded, accepting the backhanded compliment for what it was. "Thank you, but I suspect you didn't invite me here merely to acknowledge Ascendant's success." "Direct. Good." Robert set down his glass. "You're right, of course. I've asked you here to discuss a proposition that might initially seem outlandish but deserves serious consideration." His gaze held mine steadily. "I want to explore the possibility of Ascendant acquiring Lancaster Tech. If he had announced he was considering a second career as an astronaut, I couldn't have been more stunned. "Excuse me? You heard correctly." His expression remained impassive, betraying no discomfort at suggesting such a reversal of expected roles. Not immediately, but as part of a structured transition over perhaps 18 to 24 months. I set my glass down carefully, buying time to process this bombshell. Lancaster Tech's market capitalization, even after recent declines, is nearly 7 times Ascendant's current valuation. The financial logistics alone would be complex but not insurmountable, he finished for me. A combination of equity exchange, performance-based earnouts, and strategic investment from your existing backers could make it viable. A slight shrug. The details would require considerable negotiation, but the concept itself is sound. My mind raced, examining the proposition from multiple angles. It was audacious, unexpected, potentially transformative, and fraught with complications I couldn't begin to fully catalog in the moment. "Why?" I asked finally. "Why would you consider selling your life's work to a company founded by someone your son?" I hesitated, searching for appropriately diplomatic language. "Someone my son attempted to undermine professionally and personally," Robert finished bluntly. "Because Lancaster Tech needs new leadership with a vision that resonates in today's market. Because Ascendant's approach to technology and client relationships represents where the industry is heading, not where it's been." He leaned forward slightly. "And because I'd rather see Lancaster's legacy evolve under someone who understands its value than be dismantled by a conglomerate interested only in its patent portfolio." His candor was startling but appreciated. Still, I sensed there was more. "And Daniel? How does he factor into this proposition?" Something hardened in Robert's expression, not anger exactly, but a cold resolution. "Daniel has demonstrated that his judgment is compromised where you're concerned. He would have no role in the combined entity." The implications settled over me like a physical weight. Robert Lancaster was proposing not just a business transaction, but the professional excision of his own son, the ultimate parental judgment. Daniel was no longer fit to lead the company that should have been his birthright. "That's a significant decision," I said carefully. "It's a necessary one." Robert's tone was matter-of-fact. "I've built Lancaster Tech on meritocratic principles. Daniel has lost sight of those principles, allowing personal vendettas to override business judgment." He paused, his gaze becoming more penetrating. "Unlike you, who chose not to publicly expose the technical sabotage he built into the Telonix implementation." I couldn't hide my surprise. "You know about that?" "I make it my business to know what happens in my company, Ms. Chen, especially when it involves ethical breaches that could destroy client relationships." His expression was grim. Daniel's actions were unacceptable professionally and personally disappointing. I absorbed this revelation, recalibrating my understanding of Robert Lancaster in real time. He wasn't blindly loyal to his son. He wasn't ignorant of Daniel's tactics, and he clearly had sources of information I hadn't identified. "This is a lot to process," I said finally. "You're essentially proposing that I become Daniel's boss, that I take control of the company he expected to inherit." "I'm proposing that the most qualified person lead the combined entity forward," Robert corrected. "That Lancaster Tech's future be secured through bold action rather than slow decline. That my legacy evolve rather than dissolve." He reached for the scotch bottle, refreshing both our glasses. "And yes, I'm proposing a resolution to the conflict between you and my son that acknowledges merit over nepotism." The conversation continued for another hour, moving from conceptual exploration to practical considerations. Robert had clearly thought through the proposition in considerable detail: financial structures, integration challenges, leadership transitions, market positioning. He answered my questions with transparency and precision, impressing me with both his technical grasp and his strategic vision. By the time I left, night had fully fallen, the city lights sparkling below the hillside home. I hadn't committed to anything, nor had Robert expected me to. This was merely the opening of a conversation that would require extensive analysis, consultation, and negotiation before proceeding. But as I drove home, my mind humming with possibilities, I recognized that something fundamental had shifted. What had begun as a personal quest for vindication had evolved into something far more complex and potentially more significant, not just proving myself to Daniel, but potentially reshaping the very company he had once used as a weapon against me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel had said I would be nothing without him. Now I was being offered the opportunity to become, quite literally, everything above him. The question was whether that represented true victory, or merely the substitution of one form of revenge for another. The next morning, I arranged an urgent, confidential meeting with Jacob Howard. If anyone could help me navigate the complexities of Robert's proposition, it was my primary investor and most trusted business advisor. We met at his private yacht club in a secluded corner of the deck overlooking the marina, neutral territory, away from both our offices where the conversation couldn't be overheard or interrupted. An acquisition of Lancaster Tech, Jacob repeated after I'd explained Robert's proposal. Bold, unprecedented in many ways. He leaned back in his chair, calculating eyes fixed on the horizon. Structurally complex but potentially brilliant if executed correctly. You don't seem as surprised as I expected, I observed. His smile was enigmatic. The market has been speculating about Lancaster Tech's future for months. An acquisition by Ascendant wasn't on anyone's radar, but the need for drastic action has been evident to those paying attention. He turned his gaze to me. The personal dynamics, however, add a fascinating dimension. That's one word for it, I acknowledged. Robert made it clear that Daniel would have no leadership role in the combined entity. Making you, effectively, his boss? Jacob nodded slowly. A reversal that would be noticed throughout the industry. He studied me carefully. How does that aspect make you feel? Professionally and personally? I considered the question, wanting to give an honest answer rather than the expected one. Professionally, it's validating but potentially problematic. The narrative could easily become about personal victory rather than strategic business decision, which might undermine the integration process. And personally, I sighed, watching a sailboat tack against the wind in the distance. Complicated. When I started Ascendant, proving Daniel wrong was a significant motivator, showing I could succeed without him, that his assessment of my capabilities was fundamentally flawed. And you've done that, Jacob noted, convincingly. Yes, I agreed. But becoming his boss through acquiring his family's company feels like a different category of victory, one that's public, persistent, and potentially punitive in a way that simply succeeding separately isn't. Jacob nodded thoughtfully. You're concerned that accepting this proposition might transform legitimate business success into something that feels like personal retribution. Exactly. I turned to face him directly. I wanted to prove myself, not destroy him. There's a line between vindication and vengeance that I'm not sure I want to cross. An admirable distinction, Jacob acknowledged. But consider this perspective. If Lancaster Tech represents the optimal acquisition target for Ascendant's growth, if combining the companies creates genuinely superior value for clients, employees, and shareholders, then rejecting the opportunity solely due to personal history could be seen as allowing that history to continue dictating your choices. He had a point, one I'd been wrestling with since leaving Robert's home. Was declining the proposition because of its impact on Daniel any different than pursuing it because of that impact? Both choices would be reactive, defined by our relationship rather than independent business judgment. Beyond the personal dynamics, Jacob continued, the strategic rationale is compelling. Lancaster's enterprise-client relationships combined with Ascendant's superior technology, their legacy systems expertise with your innovation culture, their market presence with your growth trajectory. He spread his hands. The potential synergies are substantial. As are the integration challenges, I pointed out. Cultural alignment alone would be enormously complex. True of any acquisition, he countered. But you have unique insight into Lancaster's culture, both its strengths and weaknesses. That knowledge could be invaluable during integration. We continued discussing the business case, examining potential structures, financing options, and integration strategies. Jacob's analysis was incisive as always, helping clarify both opportunities and obstacles in Robert's proposition. As our meeting concluded, he fixed me with a penetrating look. One final thought, Mia. The most successful business leaders I've known have all mastered separating personal feelings from professional decisions, not suppressing those feelings or denying they exist, but recognizing when they should and shouldn't influence major choices. He smiled slightly. It's a skill that's particularly tested in situations like this one. I nodded, appreciating both the advice and the implicit confidence that I could navigate this complex intersection of personal history and professional opportunity. "Whatever you decide," he added as we parted, "make the choice that lets you look in the mirror with pride 10 years from now, not just the one that feels satisfying in the moment." It was excellent counsel and precisely what I needed to hear. The decision ahead wasn't simply about business strategy or personal vindication. It was about the kind of leader, the kind of person I wanted to be. Over the next 2 weeks, I immersed myself in thorough analysis of the proposition. Wei, Lisa, and I worked through potential technical integration scenarios. Our financial team developed detailed valuation models and acquisition structures. Our legal counsel assessed regulatory considerations and potential obstacles. The business case, examined objectively, was stronger than I had initially realized. Lancaster Tech's mature enterprise relationships and established market presence complemented Ascendant's innovative technology and nimble culture. Their patent portfolio, combined with our development pipeline, created a formidable competitive advantage. Even their legacy systems, properly integrated with our modern architecture, could create unique hybrid solutions for clients navigating complex digital transformations. Yet I remained troubled by the personal dimension, not just the implications for Daniel, but for my own motivations and legacy. Would acquiring Lancaster Tech be perceived as the ultimate act of revenge? Would that perception undermine the legitimate business rationale? Would I be able to lead the integrated company effectively if a significant portion of Lancaster's workforce viewed me primarily through the lens of personal conflict with their former leader? These questions still swirled in my mind when Rebecca Lancaster requested an urgent meeting. We arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant outside the city, away from industry observers who might recognize us. "I know about my father's proposition," she said without preamble when we were seated in a private corner booth. "He informed me last week." I studied her carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. "And what do you think about it?" "Professionally, I think it's brilliant," she replied, surprising me with her candor. "Lancaster Tech needs a fundamental reset in both technology approach and company culture. Ascendant represents both." She paused, selecting her next words carefully. "Personally, it's more complicated." "Because of Daniel," I suggested. She nodded, her expression troubled. "He's still my brother, despite our differences. The proposition would effectively end his career at Lancaster Tech, the company he's always expected to lead someday." "I understand your concern," I said. "Family loyalty is important." "It is," she agreed. "But so is the future of the company my father built, and the livelihoods of everyone who works there." She looked at me directly. "Daniel has been given every opportunity to prove himself as a leader. He's failed not because of capability, but because of character. Specifically, his inability to recognize and nurture talent regardless of gender or personal relationship." The assessment was brutally honest, coming from his own sister. "That's a harsh judgment, but an accurate one." She sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. "Which is why, despite the personal complications, I support my father's proposition. Lancaster Tech deserves leadership based on merit and vision, not birthright." I absorbed this, struck by her willingness to prioritize company welfare over family dynamics. "May I ask why you're telling me this?" "Because I wanted you to know that should you proceed, you would have allies within Lancaster Tech, people who understand the necessity of the transition regardless of personal connections." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And because I thought you might be concerned about the appearance of personal vindictiveness in acquiring the company, I wanted you to know that those who understand the full context see it differently." Her insight was uncanny, addressing precisely the concern that had been troubling me most. "Thank you for that perspective. It's helpful." "There's one more thing you should know," Rebecca continued, her expression growing more serious. "Daniel is aware that our father has been meeting with potential acquisition partners. He doesn't know about the discussions with you specifically, but he's become increasingly desperate to maintain control." She lowered her voice. "He's been approaching board members individually, trying to build support for a management restructuring that would give him emergency executive powers during this transitional period." A chill ran through me at the implications. "That seems extreme even for him." "He's frightened," Rebecca said simply. For the first time in his life, he faces the prospect of professional irrelevance, of watching the company he considered his birthright pass to someone else's control. Her gaze was steady, evaluative, particularly someone he once dismissed as nothing without him. The conversation with Rebecca stayed with me for days afterward, adding yet another layer to an already complex decision. Daniel's increasingly desperate maneuvers to maintain control, Rebecca's surprisingly strong support for the acquisition, the possibility of allies within Lancaster Tech who recognized the need for leadership change, all shifted my understanding of the broader context surrounding Robert's proposition. 10 days after my initial meeting with Robert Lancaster, I requested a follow-up discussion, having reached a decision after exhaustive analysis and soul-searching. We met again at his home, this time in his study, a warm, wood-paneled space lined with books and subtle displays of the technological innovations that had defined his career. As before, he offered scotch, which I accepted with a small nod of appreciation. "You've had time to consider my proposition," he observed, settling into a leather chair opposite mine. "I have," I confirmed. "Extensively and from multiple perspectives." "And your conclusion?" I met his gaze directly. Ascendant is prepared to pursue acquisition discussions with Lancaster Tech, with some specific conditions regarding structure, leadership transition, and retention of key talent. Robert's expression remained impassive, though I detected a flicker of what might have been relief in his eyes. "I anticipated conditions. What specifically are you proposing?" "First, a phased integration over 24 months, with you remaining as chairman for at least the first 12 to provide continuity and market confidence." I began outlining the framework I'd developed. "Second, a leadership structure that evaluates all executives from both companies based on merit and cultural fit rather than predetermined assignments." He nodded slowly. "Reasonable? And my son?" I'd wrestled with this aspect more than any other, seeking an approach that balanced business necessity with basic humanity. Daniel will be offered a position commensurate with his technical capabilities, but without direct leadership authority. If he declines, he'll receive an appropriate severance package reflecting his years of service. A slight frown crossed Robert's face. "You're offering him a place in the combined entity, despite everything?" "I'm offering him an opportunity to contribute based on his genuine talents, which are substantial," I clarified. "His technical brilliance isn't in question. His leadership approach is. This structure acknowledges the former while addressing the latter." Robert studied me with increased intensity, as if reassessing his initial impressions. "That's more generous than I expected. Than he deserves, arguably." "It's not about what he deserves," I replied. "It's about building the strongest possible combined organization. Daniel's technical insights remain valuable, even if his leadership philosophy doesn't align with the company we're creating. And if he refuses to accept a diminished role, then that's his choice, not our imposition." I sipped my scotch, feeling the welcome burn. "I have no interest in punishing Daniel, Mr. Lancaster. My goal is to build something extraordinary, not settle old scores." Something shifted in Robert's expression, a subtle softening, a new respect. "Call me Robert, please. And I believe you mean that." "I do," I confirmed. "Which brings me to my final condition. This acquisition must be presented as a strategic business decision based on technological and market synergies, not as a personal transition of power from your family to me." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't want your victory emphasized in the narrative?" "This isn't about victory," I said firmly. "It's about evolution. Lancaster Tech's legacy combined with Ascendant's innovation to create something greater than either could achieve separately. That's the story I want told, because that's the reality I want to build." Robert was silent for a long moment, the only sound the subtle ticking of an antique clock on his desk. Finally, he smiled, genuinely this time with warmth I hadn't seen from him before. "My wife used to say that true character is revealed not in how people handle failure, but in how they handle success," he said quietly. "I think she would have appreciated your approach, Ms. Chen." Something in his tone, in the mention of his late wife, made the moment feel unexpectedly personal, a glimpse of the man behind the business titan. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a great deal." Robert nodded once, decisively. "Let's proceed then. I'll instruct our CFO to provide the financial disclosures your team will need for due diligence, and we can begin drafting a preliminary agreement." As we shook hands to conclude the meeting, I felt a strange sense of things coming full circle. What had begun as a quest to prove my worth independent of Daniel's assessment had evolved into something far more significant: the potential to reshape not just my own future, but the future of the very company where my journey had begun. The acquisition process unfolded with remarkable speed over the following 2 months. Once the initial framework was established, both companies had strong incentives to move quickly: Lancaster Tech to stabilize market perception, Ascendant to capitalize on momentum. We maintained strict confidentiality during preliminary negotiations, with only a small team from each company involved in due diligence and integration planning. But as we approached final agreement, preparing for public announcement, the inevitable occurred. Word began to leak. The first industry blog post speculating about unusual activity between Ascendant and Lancaster Tech appeared on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, 3 more publications had picked up the story, each adding details and conjectures from unnamed sources familiar with the discussions. On Thursday, Lancaster Tech's stock price jumped 12% on heavy trading volume, forcing both companies to issue carefully worded statements acknowledging exploratory discussions regarding potential strategic partnership, but providing no specifics. I was reviewing the latest integration timeline with Wei when my assistant knocked urgently at my office door. "Daniel Lancaster is here," she said, her expression telegraphing both surprise and concern. "He's demanding to see you immediately. Security is holding him in the lobby." My heart rate accelerated, but I kept my expression neutral. "How many people are in the lobby currently?" "It's fairly busy. Midday meetings coming and going." I briefly considered refusing the meeting or having him escorted to a conference room, but either approach would likely escalate the situation. Better to address this directly and privately. Have security bring him up, I decided. And clear this floor of non-essential personnel for the next hour. I don't want an audience for whatever this is. Wei frowned. "Want me to stay, or get Marcus in here?" I shook my head. "This needs to be between Daniel and me, but have security on standby, just in case." 5 minutes later, Daniel Lancaster strode into my office, radiating cold fury barely contained beneath a veneer of control. He looked simultaneously familiar and strange, the same arrogant posture, the same precisely tailored suit, but thinner than I remembered, with new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. "Quite the empire you've built," he remarked, glancing around my office without taking the seat I'd gestured toward. "All glass and open space, very Millennium Silicon Valley." "Thank you for the design critique," I replied evenly. "I assume you're here about the acquisition discussions?" No point pretending we didn't know what this was about. The directness seemed to briefly throw him off his practiced script. "Acquisition," he repeated, a harsh laugh escaping him. "Is that what my father's calling it? This corporate coup you've engineered?" I maintained my calm demeanor, recognizing the deliberate provocations for what they were. "Your father approached Ascendant with a proposition for combining our companies. We've been exploring that possibility through normal business channels." "Normal business channels," he mimicked, pacing now, unable to contain his agitation. "There's nothing normal about this situation, Mia, and we both know it. You've been planning this since the day you left Lancaster Tech." "That's not true," I said firmly. "When I founded Ascendant, acquisition of Lancaster wasn't remotely on my radar. It wasn't even a possibility until your father suggested it." Daniel stopped pacing, turning to face me directly. "And you expect me to believe that? That my father spontaneously decided to hand over control of a company he spent 40 years building to someone who's been a CEO for less than 2 years? Someone with an obvious personal vendetta against his son?" I studied him, seeing beyond the anger to the fear beneath it, fear of irrelevance, of losing his assumed birthright, of being proven fundamentally wrong in his assessment of my capabilities. "Your father made a business decision based on market realities," I said quietly. "Lancaster Tech is losing market share, struggling to innovate, watching its best talent migrate to competitors, including Ascendant. The acquisition represents a path forward that preserves the company's legacy while addressing its current challenges." "Its legacy," he repeated bitterly. "You mean my father's legacy? What about my future? My role in the company I've worked at my entire career?" This was the question I'd been expecting, the real reason for his unannounced visit. The agreement includes a position for you focusing on technical innovation, your genuine strength, Daniel. No direct reports, no leadership responsibilities, but full access to development resources and recognition for your contributions. His expression transformed from anger to something closer to bewilderment. You're offering me a job? In my own company, now controlled by you? He laughed again, the sound brittle and sharp. That's actually worse than firing me outright. It's patronizing, humiliating. It's practical, I corrected. Your technical insights are valuable. Your leadership approach is problematic. The role acknowledges both realities. Daniel moved closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. This is about revenge, isn't it? Making me work for you. Proving you can succeed without me by literally taking everything that was supposed to be mine. I met his gaze steadily. This is about building something better than either Lancaster Tech or Ascendant could create separately. Your place in that future is entirely your choice, Daniel. Accept the role offered, with its genuine opportunities and reasonable limitations, or decline it, take the severance package, and build something new yourself. For a moment, something vulnerable flashed across his face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first genuine recognition that his assumed future had irrevocably changed. But it quickly hardened back into familiar arrogance. You think you've won, he said, his tone coldly dismissive. That this acquisition makes you some kind of corporate conqueror. But we both know the truth, Mia. You're still the same second-rate developer who needed my guidance to advance. The only difference is now you've convinced my father of your carefully constructed illusion. The words were designed to wound, to penetrate old insecurities and reignite self-doubt. Months ago, they might have succeeded. Now they merely revealed the desperate flailing of someone who couldn't accept a changing reality. I'm sorry you see it that way, I said simply. The offer remains open until the acquisition closes. After that, we'll need to move forward with or without your participation. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for some crack in my composure, some sign that his words had landed as intended. Finding none, he straightened his jacket with a sharp tug. This isn't over, he said, the words more habitual than convincing. My father may have temporary infatuation with your supposed vision, but he'll recognize the mistake eventually. Perhaps, I acknowledged, refusing to be drawn into further argument. In the meantime, I have an acquisition to complete and a company to run. Was there anything else you needed to discuss? The dismissal was gentle but unmistakable. Daniel's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching visibly at his temple. For a second I thought he might continue the confrontation, but instead he turned abruptly and strode toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, not looking back. He said you'd be nothing without him, he said, his voice unnervingly quiet. That day you overheard us talking in the conference room, my father said you'd be nothing without the Lancaster name behind you. A pause, heavy with implication. And now here you are, using our name to legitimize your upstart company. Ironic, isn't it? The door closed behind him before I could respond, leaving me alone with this unexpected revelation. It hadn't been Daniel who'd originally dismissed my potential, but Robert? The same Robert who now proposed making me CEO of the combined entity? I sank into my chair, mind racing to recalibrate past events with this new information. Had Daniel merely been echoing his father's assessment when he told me I'd be nothing without him? Had Robert's current support been motivated by genuine recognition of Ascendant's value, or by guilt over his earlier dismissal of my capabilities? These questions lingered as we moved into the final stages of acquisition planning. The public announcement was scheduled, integration teams were preparing for day one activities, and provisional leadership assignments were being finalized. Through it all, I maintained professional focus, but Daniel's parting revelation continued to trouble me. Not because it changed the business rationale for the acquisition that remained sound regardless of historical personal dynamics, but because it suggested a narrative more complex than the simple redemption story I'd been constructing in my mind. The morning before the public announcement, I requested a private meeting with Robert Lancaster. We met in a neutral location, a private dining room at an exclusive club where neither of us would be recognized or interrupted. Second thoughts? He asked as we settled at the table, his expression concerned but not alarmed. Clarification needed, I corrected. About something Daniel mentioned during our recent encounter. Robert's expression tightened slightly. I heard about his unannounced visit to your office. I apologize for that. He's not handling this transition well. Understandable, given the circumstances, I acknowledged. But he said something specific that I need to verify. I met his gaze directly. He claimed that the day I overheard him saying I'd be nothing without him, he was actually quoting you, that you had dismissed my potential, not him. Robert didn't respond immediately. He looked down at his hands. Strong, weathered hands that had built a tech empire from nothing, then back up at me with unexpected candor in his eyes. It's partially true, he admitted. During a leadership discussion about 5 years ago, when Daniel first suggested promoting you to the development team, I questioned whether you had the background or connections to succeed at Lancaster's executive level without significant mentoring. He held my gaze steadily. I was wrong in that assessment, obviously. Your success with Ascendant has demonstrated that conclusively. I absorbed this, appreciating his honesty while processing its implications. So when Daniel told me I'd be nothing without him, he was exaggerating and personalizing a more nuanced concern I'd expressed about fast-tracking someone without traditional industry credentials, Robert finished. A concern that reflected my generational biases more than your actual capabilities. The explanation made sense, contextualizing both Daniel's dismissive attitude and Robert's current support for my leadership of the combined entity. It wasn't simple guilt over past misjudgment driving his proposition. It was recognition that those misjudgments had been proven fundamentally wrong by subsequent events. Thank you for the clarification, I said. It doesn't change anything about the acquisition, but it helps me understand the fuller context. May I ask why it was important enough to warrant this meeting? Robert inquired, genuine curiosity in his tone. I considered the question carefully. Because I wanted to ensure I was proceeding with clear eyes about everyone's motivations, including yours. This acquisition isn't about personal redemption or vindication. It's about creating the strongest possible company moving forward. Robert nodded slowly, a new respect evident in his expression. That attitude is precisely why you're the right person to lead the combined entity, Ms. Chen. You've managed to turn a personal setback into professional triumph without letting it distort your business judgment. He smiled slightly. That's remarkably rare in my experience. The observation stayed with me as we finalized preparations for the public announcement. Robert was right. I had transformed what could have been merely a quest for personal vindication into something more meaningful, the creation of a company that embodied the values and approaches I believed in, that provided opportunities based on merit rather than connections or gender, that built technology serving actual client needs rather than internal politics. The day of the announcement arrived with a sense of momentous anticipation. The press release had been meticulously crafted, emphasizing the strategic business rationale while acknowledging the human dynamics with appropriate sensitivity. I would be announced as CEO of the combined entity, with Robert remaining as chairman for the transition period. Daniel's future role was described as under discussion, a diplomatic placeholder allowing him time to decide his own path. An hour before the press conference, as I reviewed my talking points one final time in my office, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I still recognized despite its absence from my recent communications. Daniel, enjoy your moment in the spotlight. You've earned it, even if not in the way you'd have us believe. I stared at the message, parsing its meaning. Was it genuine congratulations tinged with residual bitterness? A backhanded compliment designed to unsettle me before the announcement? Or something more complex, an acknowledgement perhaps that our intertwined professional journeys had produced an outcome neither of us could have anticipated. After brief consideration, I typed a response. Thank you. The offer remains open if you're interested in being part of what comes next. His reply came seconds later. We'll see. Some stories aren't finished yet. Cryptic, perhaps deliberately so, but not actively hostile, a small but meaningful distinction from our previous exchanges. I set the phone aside, returning my focus to the announcement ahead and the substantial work that would follow. The press conference proceeded exactly as planned. Robert and I presented a united front, emphasizing technological synergies and market opportunities while projecting confidence about the integration process. Financial analysts asked predictably detailed questions about valuation and expected efficiencies. Technology journalists probed for specifics about product roadmaps and innovation strategies. Only one reporter ventured into personal territory, asking how I felt about taking control of the company where I'd previously been dismissed. My response was measured but honest. Every professional journey includes setbacks and pivotal moments that shape our paths. Mine certainly has. But today isn't about individual narratives. It's about combining two innovative companies to create something greater than either could achieve separately. That's where our focus remains. The answer seemed to satisfy the assembled press, allowing us to steer the conversation back to business considerations for the remainder of the event. Afterward, as Robert and I walked back to the private room where our respective teams waited, he paused briefly in the empty hallway. "Handled perfectly," he said, genuine appreciation in his tone. "Acknowledged the elephant in the room without allowing it to dominate the narrative?" "Thank you," I replied. "It won't be the last time we face that question, but hopefully interest will shift to execution and results as the integration proceeds." He nodded, then asked with careful neutrality, "Any word from Daniel?" "Brief text exchange before the announcement," I confirmed. "Non-committal, but not overtly hostile. I think he's still processing." "As are we all," Robert acknowledged, a hint of sadness briefly visible beneath his professional demeanor. Change of this magnitude takes time to fully absorb, even when intellectually understood. That evening, after the final interviews and internal announcements, I found myself alone in my office, watching darkness fall over the city through my wall of windows. The acquisition was official now, publicly declared and contractually binding. In 30 days, following regulatory approval, I would become CEO of the combined entity, to be known as Ascendant Technologies, preserving elements of both companies' identities while signaling the forward-looking orientation of the merged organization. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Lisa, checking in after a day of coordinating internal communications about the acquisition. "How are you feeling?" she asked, after confirming that all employee notifications had been successfully delivered. "This is a monumental day." I considered the question, searching for an honest answer rather than the expected one. "Validated but thoughtful," I said finally. "This represents extraordinary vindication of what we've built, but also introduces new responsibilities and complexities." "And personally?" she pressed gently. "About Daniel, specifically?" I glanced at the city lights, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. "It's not what I expected when I started Ascendant," I admitted. "Proving I could succeed without him, yes. Taking control of his family's company, no." I paused, searching for words to capture the nuanced emotions. There's satisfaction, certainly, but it's tempered by recognition that this isn't simply about him and me anymore. It's about the thousands of people at both companies whose futures now depend on our successful integration. "That perspective is why you'll succeed as CEO of the combined entity," Lisa observed. "You've moved beyond the personal narrative to the larger purpose." Her words echoed my earlier conversation with Robert, highlighting an evolution I'd experienced gradually but hadn't fully articulated. The revenge that had initially motivated me had been replaced by something more meaningful, the opportunity to build an organization reflecting values I believed in, offering opportunities based on merit rather than privilege, developing technology that genuinely served client needs. The next morning, the headlines told the story of the acquisition from various perspectives: financial analysis of the transaction details, technology speculation about product roadmaps, human interest angles on the developer-turned-CEO narrative. As predicted, several publications focused on the reversal of fortune aspect, with headlines like "From Dismissed to Dominant," "Mia Chen's Lancaster Tech Takeover," and "Tech's Ultimate Comeback Story, Former Employee Acquires Lancaster." I skimmed these with mixed feelings, recognizing their narrative appeal while knowing they oversimplified the complex business, strategic, and personal dynamics at play. The acquisition wasn't merely personal vindication, it was sound business strategy combining complementary strengths to create a more competitive entity. A week into the regulatory review period, as integration planning accelerated and cultural alignment workshops began, I received an unexpected meeting request from Daniel Lancaster. The subject line read simply, "Next Steps." I approved it without hesitation, curious about his thinking after the acquisition announcement. He arrived exactly on time, dressed more casually than during his previous visit. chinos and a button-down rather than his usual tailored suit. The change in appearance seemed symbolic somehow, a visual acknowledgement of shifting circumstances. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, his tone businesslike but without the undercurrent of hostility I'd come to expect. "I've been considering the role you outlined during our last conversation." I gestured for him to continue, maintaining neutral, attentive body language. "Initially, I found the idea unacceptable," he admitted. "Working at a company I'd expected to lead, without leadership authority, reporting ultimately to someone I once—" He hesitated, searching for appropriate phrasing. "Underestimated," I suggested. A brief, reluctant smile flickered across his face. "That's diplomatic. I was going to say dismissed, but your version is more accurate." I nodded, appreciating the small acknowledgement. "And now? Has your perspective changed?" Daniel moved to the window, gazing out at the city view as he gathered his thoughts. "I've spent the past week thinking about alternatives, other companies, potential startups, even leaving tech entirely." He turned back to face me. "None of them felt right. Lancaster Tech, whatever it's called now, has been my professional home for my entire career. The thought of starting over elsewhere at 42 is challenging. So you're considering accepting the offered position?" I kept my tone neutral, neither encouraging nor discouraging. "I'm considering it," he confirmed. "But I have questions about how it would actually function in practice. Reporting structure, project selection, recognition protocols." For the next hour, we discussed these details with surprising professional focus. Daniel asked thoughtful, substantive questions about how his technical expertise would be utilized, how credit for innovations would be attributed, how performance would be evaluated without traditional leadership metrics. I answered honestly, emphasizing both the genuine value his technical brilliance could bring to the combined organization and the clear boundaries that would prevent reversion to previous problematic dynamics. "So I'd report to Wei," he clarified, referring to Ascendant's CTO, who would maintain that role in the merged entity. "Correct. Wei has demonstrated exceptional technical judgment and collaborative leadership. He values innovation regardless of source and ensures appropriate attribution for contributions." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing this reality, that he would report to someone who had once been his subordinate at Lancaster Tech, who had left to join Ascendant during our early growth phase. "And you?" he asked finally. "Would we interact directly in this structure?" "As needed for specific strategic initiatives, yes, but not in a direct reporting relationship." I held his gaze steadily. "I think we both recognize that would introduce unnecessary complications. Because of our history. Because of how that history might influence perceptions throughout the organization," I clarified. "This isn't about my comfort or yours. It's about creating the clearest, most effective structure for the combined entity." He studied me with unexpected thoughtfulness. "You've changed, Mia. Become more strategic in your thinking." "I've had to," I acknowledged. "Building and leading Ascendant required evolution beyond technical excellence into organizational vision and people leadership. Skills I suggested you lacked," he noted, a hint of self-awareness in his tone. "Skills I hadn't yet fully developed," I corrected, "which is different from being inherently incapable of developing them." Daniel nodded slowly, accepting the distinction. "I'd like to accept the position," he said finally, "with the understanding that it's provisional for both parties. If it's not working after 6 months, for either of us, we reevaluate." "That seems reasonable," I agreed, surprised but pleased by the maturity of his approach. "I'll have HR prepare the formal offer with those terms specified." As he prepared to leave, Daniel paused at the door, an uncharacteristic hesitation in his posture. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "you've proven me wrong. About your capabilities, your potential, all of it." He glanced back briefly. "That doesn't happen often." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me with the closest thing to an apology I'd ever expected to receive from Daniel Lancaster. It wasn't effusive or emotionally demonstrative. That wasn't his style. But it was genuine acknowledgement of his misjudgment, offered without qualification or defensiveness. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A loosening of a knot I hadn't fully recognized was still there. Daniel's acknowledgement didn't change the past or erase the difficulty of my journey, but it represented a form of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. The regulatory approval process concluded 3 weeks later, right on schedule. The day before I would officially assume the role of CEO of the combined Ascendant Technologies, I found myself once again in Robert Lancaster's modernist home, this time for a small private celebration with just the key architects of the acquisition: Robert, Jacob, Rebecca, myself, and the lead attorneys who had structured the complex transaction. As we raised glasses in a toast to successful integration, Robert pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the terrace. "I received Daniel's signed acceptance of the technical innovation role today," he said, satisfaction evident in his tone. "That's the final piece falling into place." "I'm glad," I replied sincerely. "His technical contributions will be valuable if he can adapt to the new structure." "I believe he will, with time," Robert mused. "This experience has been educational for him, long overdue perhaps, but impactful." I nodded, understanding the complex emotions a father might feel watching his son face consequences, while hoping for growth from the experience. "I've been meaning to ask," Robert continued, his gaze shifting to the city lights below. "That day in the conference room, when you overheard Daniel say you'd be nothing without him, what exactly did that do to you? How did it affect your path?" The question was unexpectedly personal, particularly coming from someone who typically maintained professional boundaries. But something about the moment, the culmination of our unlikely partnership, the threshold of a new chapter, seemed to warrant candor. "It shattered something," I admitted. "My confidence, initially, my sense of professional value. But once I moved through that reaction, it became a catalyst, a challenge to prove not just that he was wrong, but that the entire perspective was flawed." "And now you have," Robert observed. "Now we have," I corrected. "This acquisition isn't just about my journey or Daniel's misjudgment. It's about combining two companies to create something stronger than either could be separately." He studied me thoughtfully. "You know, when I first suggested this acquisition to the board, several members questioned whether your history with Daniel would interfere with sound business judgment, whether this was personal for you rather than strategic." "And what did you tell them?" I asked, genuinely curious. "That I'd observed you closely enough to recognize that while personal vindication might have launched your journey, it no longer defined your destination." He smiled slightly. "That you'd become a leader who could separate personal history from professional decisions when necessary." His assessment was surprisingly insightful, acknowledging both the initial motivating force of proving Daniel wrong and the evolution beyond that motivation to broader purpose and vision. "Thank you for that perception," I said, "and for the trust it represents." The next morning, I arrived early at what had once been Lancaster Tech headquarters, but would now serve as the primary campus of Ascendant Technologies. The building was quiet, the official transition ceremonies scheduled for later that day. I wanted a moment of private reflection before the public assumption of my new role. The executive floor was deserted as I made my way to what would now be my office, previously Robert's, with its commanding views and subtle displays of the company's historical achievements. I'd insisted that these remain in place, honoring the legacy even as we charted a new course. As I stood by the windows, watching the sun rise over the city where my professional journey had unfolded with such unexpected twists, I heard the door open behind me. Turning, I found Daniel in the doorway, as surprised to see me as I was to see him. "Early start?" he asked, recovering quickly. "Private moment," I corrected. "Before the official ceremonies." He nodded in understanding. "Same. I've been cleaning out my old office. Thought I'd stop by here one last time before everything changes." The air between us hung heavy with history, professional and personal, collaborative and competitive, a complex tapestry of interaction that had shaped both our careers in ways neither could have anticipated. "It's strange," he said after a moment, moving further into the room but maintaining a respectful distance. "I always expected to occupy this office someday, practice the speech I'd give on my first day as CEO, plan the changes I'd implement. And now?" I asked quietly. He shrugged, a gesture that seemed to encompass acceptance of altered circumstances. "Now I focus on what I'm genuinely good at, technical innovation, and leave the leadership to someone better suited for it." The admission represented growth I hadn't been certain Daniel was capable of, recognition of his limitations alongside his strengths, acceptance of a role aligned with the latter rather than insistence on position regardless of fit. "The company will benefit from your technical contributions," I said sincerely. That talent has never been in question. He nodded, acknowledging the distinction between his technical capabilities and leadership approach. For what it's worth, he said after a moment, I think my father made the right choice. For the company, for the employees, for the future. A pause, heavy with unspoken history. You'll build something better than I would have. The admission, entirely unexpected, fundamentally transformative, settled over me with the weight of genuine closure. Not because I needed Daniel's approval or validation, but because it represented the final resolution of the narrative that had begun that day in the conference room years ago. He had said I would be nothing without him. I had proven that assessment not just wrong, but fundamentally misguided. And now, in the ultimate reversal, he was acknowledging that the company he had expected to inherit would be better led by me than by him. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving him wrong or myself right. It was about building something that transcended our personal history, a company that would provide opportunities based on merit rather than privilege, that would develop technology serving genuine needs rather than ego or status, that would value contribution over connection. Thank you, I said simply. I intend to honor both the Lancaster legacy and the Ascendant vision in building what comes next. He nodded once, accepting this as the professional commitment it was, rather than a personal reassurance. The official ceremony is at 10? Yes, in the main auditorium. I'll be there, he confirmed, turning to leave. At the door, he paused, glancing back with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Congratulations, Mia. Genuinely. After he was gone, I returned my gaze to the sunrise, feeling a sense of completion alongside the anticipation of new beginnings. The journey that had begun with devastation and determination had arrived at a destination I couldn't have imagined. Not just professional success or personal vindication, but the opportunity to reshape an entire organization according to principles I believed in. Daniel had said I would be nothing without him. Instead, I had become everything I was capable of being, on my own terms, through my own efforts, driven by my own vision. And now, as CEO of Ascendant Technologies, I had the chance to ensure others could do the same. The perfect revenge, it turned out, wasn't destroying what Daniel valued most. It was transforming it into something better than he could have created, something that would outlast both our careers, contributing value long after our personal conflict had faded into corporate history. As the morning light strengthened, illuminating the city where my professional journey had unfolded with such unexpected turns, I felt ready for what came next. Not just as Daniel's former subordinate turned boss, but as a leader with a vision for technology, for business, and for the people who would build both. He had said I'd be nothing without him. I had become a CEO and his boss. But more importantly, I had become exactly who I was meant to be all along.